the Italian game, but it's on steroids. Like we already looked on, if they play bishop c5, we just play the Ivan's Gambit. But if they play knight f6, we're actually going to be playing pawn to d4. Because, okay, if they take the free pawn, we take on e5, and that's actually losing for black. Like, we're already threatening to sack on f7, play queen d5, pick up the knight. If they continue to develop normally, queen to d5 threatens a checkmate, also wins the knight. So this is just winning for white. So usually they decide to take with the pawn, but we're still going to castle the king. And a lot of person, they play bishop e7 here, and I just play e5 and attack their knight. If they decide to take on e4, however, this is where we're actually going to surprise them with immediate knight c3. This is called the, I can't pronounce it, Mac Hansen Gambit. It's the Nack Manson Gambit. But the whole idea is nobody, let me tell you how funny this is. Nobody is going to play pawn takes because of how dangerous it looks. It seems as if queen to d5 wins the game, and bishop takes f7 followed by queen to d5 is just very strong. Now, if the king moves, we're not even going to take the knight. We're going to play rook to e1, hit the knight. If they try to play bishop e7, we grab this, knight g5, queen f7 is mate. Everybody's going to try pawn to h6, but that's even worse because now we're able to sacrifice the bishop. And the reason why this is so strong is if the pawn takes, now we check and there's no pawn to g6 to block the check. So now the king just has to move. The rook is coming in. We're going to take on f6 and black will be mated. And the funny thing is the natural looking rook takes h6. That's actually a checkmate in one move. But I still haven't told you guys the funny thing as yet. Most people are going to decide to take with the knight, and then once you play pawn takes, they play pawn to d5. Here I like to play bishop to b5. Now I'm threatening to play knight t5, applying pressure to the pin. Pawn takes, there's also queen takes because the knight is pinned, and then rook to e1 is coming. The funny thing about this line is pawn takes c3 is actually the best move and nobody's going to play because the computer recommended variation is after we sack on f7, there's queen d5. Black has to find king to f6. Nobody's going to play king to f6. And then after we play rook e1, they have to find knight e7. And, usually here we take and then we continue to attack. This is the best that black could get from this position. So if you're an Italian game player, I want you to watch this full video. Apply these stuff that I teach and your ratings will go through the roof. Kicking things off in the 500 region. Today I'm going to be showing you guys the Italian game, but a very aggressive version of the Italian game. Once they play the move knight to f6, we play pawn to d4. Not attacking, not guarding my pawn, but attacking their pawn. And then once they take our pawn on d4, don't guard this pawn. Don't take back the pawn, just castle. Because now we're not afraid if they take the second pawn on e4, but if they don't take the pawn on e4, we're going to move the pawn forward to attack their knight. So this is one of the ways how they could lose. If the bishop goes to c5, we just play pawn to e5 and we're attacking their knight. If the pawn goes to d5, we take their knight followed by bishop g5, and that's going to be a winning advantage for us. I mean, if he wants to pull his knight back to g8, that's on him. And as we discussed, if the knight goes to g5, we sack the bishop and we're winning the game. Okay, this time we see someone put the knight on e4, which is also a mistake. Whenever you see moves like knight e4, I like to play bishop to d5 and attack the knight. Because now the knight doesn't have any squares. So he has to play pawn to f5. Pawn to f5 is the only move that guards the knight. But once he plays pawn to f5, as you can see, he's going to lose the chance of castling his king. Okay, he decides to sacrifice the knight, which is fine. What he's seeing, here's what he's seeing. If I take with the rook, he plays pawn to d3, and then he's pinning my rook. So that's very interesting. With that being said, I'm going to take with the king because I'm not trying to lose my rook. And then when he plays pawn to d3, I'm going to play bishop to e3. Now, I am ahead by a piece, but for some reason, my king is marching in the center of the board. But my king should be safe in this position. I'm not really seeing how he could easily open the position. And once this happens, I'm just going to run my king back to safety. So pawn e3, my king is in check. There is also king g3. But because I'm ahead by a piece, my goal is to start trading pieces off the board. So he took on e3. Let's take back on e3. He took on c2. We have to take on c2. And then his king is castled and my king is not castled. So I have to be very careful here. But let me just play knight c3. Let's just finish the development, get my rook in the game, run my king back to g1, and I'm just going to be playing with an extra piece. I have to be very careful here, by the way. So for example, rook to e8. Now he's targeting my pawn on e5 twice. I'm only guarding it once. So I'm thinking of playing the move queen to f5, apply some defense to my pawn, threatening his pawn on f7. Let's do that. Let's play queen to f5. Because if he plays pawn to d6, think he's applying pressure, he could be losing his rook. And I now have two pieces targeting f7. I am expecting him to play something like queen to e7, applying more pressure to my pawn. But at that point, I should be able to start running the king. But then he puts the rook back on f8. And funny enough, I'm going to be winning this game with my king on e3. So look at this. I have, how many pieces do I have attacking f7? 2. He has 2 pieces guarding f7. But what happens when I hit him with knight to g5? I now have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces attacking f7. He only has 2. Plus, I'm threatening a checkmate on h7. So he plays pawn to g6 just to defend against the mate. He's also attacking my queen. I mean, let's say we take with check. He moves. I'm just going to move my queen out the way. Once I move my queen out the way, I just have too many pieces attacking f7. He's still not able to add additional defense to f7. Best he could do now is move his king out the way, but I'm still going to take and I'm still going to be threatening queen h6. Okay, pawn to d6 was played. Yeah, we're not going to be trying to find some checkmates. First thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to take with the bishop. I'm actually going to take with the knight because the bishop is on the same line as the king and I'm attacking the queen. So now, if he moves away the queen, I'm able to do a discovered attack on his king. So for example, queen to d7 could lead to a checkmate because he has to ensure that the queen keeps guarding the rook. So I'm expecting queen to e7. Queen to e8 was played, but that's just losing because my bishop is on the same diagonal as the queen. So all I need to do now is play the move knight takes d6, and that comes with a check. The bishop attacks the king, the knight attacks the queen. Now once he moves the king, I may just take the rook and said, okay, I won a rook, or I may take the queen and win a rook that way. In both cases, I'm winning a rook. Okay, he blocks with the bishop. It's the same thing. If I take his rook, he takes. So let's just take his queen, allow him to take my queen. And even before I take his rook, I have an in-between move. Taking on e6 first with check. Forcing his king to react to that. And then I'm going to take his rook. He needs to play king to f8 though. So when I take his rook, he takes my knight. But I'm going to be ahead by a lot of material. Okay, that also works. Because once I take his rook. Okay, how do I take his rook? Do I even take his rook? I'm ahead by 6. If I take his rook, yeah, I have to take the rook. That's more material. I'm going to take with the king because once he plays rook takes, my bishop is going to be under attack and I want to be able to fork his rook and his knight. I was about to say I don't want to lose my pawn, but I won't lose it because if the rook takes the pawn, the knight is the only defender of the rook and I'm just going to get rid of the knight. And then if he takes my bishop, he loses the rook. So it's best if he checks, but this is just winning. He checks. Let's just move the king. The goal is now to trade and I'm already attacking both of his pieces. So he moves the rook. Now we're just going to take the knight because the goal is to trade. And then once he takes back, we're just going to swing this rook over to the d file because the goal is to trade. So he moves his rook to e8. Now let's just play rook to d7. That's one rook on the 7th rank. The goal is to put 2 rooks on the 7th rank. And then we're going to be checkmating him on the 7th. And the opponent resigns. More Italian game against 600 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600 and we're going to be playing some more Italian game. Now knight c6, we're going to be playing the move bishop c4. This is the Italian game. After they play knight to f6, we're going to play the move pawn to d4. This is us trying to play the Italian more aggressive. Like I'm sure you guys seen me play pawn to d3 before. We're going to be playing pawn to d4 this time around. Now, once they take, yes, the knight is also attacking this pawn. We're just going to castle the king, allowing them to take a second pawn. Bishop to e7 is one of the moves that I've seen most often. Because they're trying to castle their king very quickly. Whenever they play this move, just play pawn to e5 and attack the knight. And this is one of the lines where we may allow them to castle, but their king is going to be exposed. Or, for example, if the bishop goes to g4, you need to be able to spot that your pawn on e5 is under attack twice. Now, taking on f7, then playing knight g5 shouldn't work. So let's just play the move rook to e1. That's the idea. Just applying some more defense to the pawn. And then once the king castle, we play the move pawn h3, chasing away this knight. So now the knight has to step back to h6. And then once the knight step back to h6, we simply get rid of the knight, double up the pawns in front of the king. And that should give us a nice little advantage. Well, I guess he didn't want to expose his king, so he decided to sacrifice the knight. I mean, I have two pieces guarding the pawn. I mean, it's only been guarded by his knight, so let's just take on e5 here. And then after knight takes c5, we're just going to take, and okay, 10 moves into the Italian game, we're already ahead by a piece. And if you want to play against me, just leave a comment of your username and your ratings, and I'll send you a challenge. Now, bishop f6 hits the rook. Let's just pull the rook back. That's fine. From here, we're just trying to finish our development. Pawn to b6 was played, which means he's trying to fianchetto his bishop. I'm going to play the move pawn c3, threatening to take the pawn. And then if he takes my pawn, I play knight takes c3. And this is just me trying to finish my development as quickly as I can. So pawn takes, we play knight takes. We're still ahead by a piece. And bishop b7, he's finishing his development, which means I'm also going to be finishing my development. So all my pieces are now developed. I just need to get my a-rook in the game, put my queen on a good square, and I'll be very active. Okay, bishop to g5. It's funny how he wants to trade queens and he's down in material, but I think I see what his idea is. If I take on g5, he plays queen takes and he's actually threatening a checkmate. Now, we still know that to take is a mistake. So instead of me taking his bishop, allowing his queen to get active, I'm going to protect my bishop with the queen. So that way, if he takes my bishop, my queen becomes active. Okay, he took the bishop. Let's take back with the queen. Now, all our pieces are very active. Pawn to d6 was played, and my rook on a1 is the only piece that's not doing anything. So let's swing it on the open file. Now every single one of my pieces are doing something, which means it is time to start the attack. Queen to d7. Okay, he's connecting his rooks. Let's start some little attack now. Let's play knight d5. You know, just moving the knight forward. There's no rook e7 to hit the queen. There's some little tricks where if I put the queen on the same line as the king, I'm able to play knight f6 and then the pawn is going to be pinned and I'm going to be able to win the queen. So it's very interesting. I'm ahead by a piece though, so it should be winning. And I think he just saw all of that and played king to h8. Okay. Let's continue with the plan. Rook to e7. Rook on the 7 is in heaven. And I'm also forking f7 because now I'm attacking f7 twice. He was only guarding it once. Queen c6 was played. But now I'm also attacking c7 twice. So what I'm going to do is take on c7 and attack his queen. Now the queen has to move. And he could also be losing his pawn on d6. Okay, queen to a4. Queen to a4 hits the unprotected rook. I'm going to play the move rook to d4. There's no little check. There's no back rank check. I'm putting my rook on the same rank as his queen as well. And I can always swing my rook over to h4 if I want. For example, I'm trying to set up a, what's that checkmate called? An Anastasia mate, where if the knight is on e7, I'm able to sack the queen and then swing the rook. So queen a5 was played. He's trying to now check me here, which I'm not afraid of that check actually. So let's just play knight e7. Let's continue to set up our Anastasia mate. Okay, he checks the king. King has to move. Let's see what else he has. Because he only had one check in that position. I'm ahead by 2 points, by the way. So if he wants to like force the queens off the board, then I'm fine with that. And that's what he did. Okay, so let's just take the queen. And I'm still trying to set up my checkmate. So rook h4, knight g6. He's going to be able to play pawn takes. The bishop is hanging though. So let's play rook d7. Let's put 2 rooks on the 7th. His bishop is hanging. I'm not sure where he's going to put the bishop. Maybe to e4. And then I'm going to try to take these pawns. If I'm able to take these pawns, then he should be getting checkmated. Okay, bishop to e4 was played. Let's move the knight. I'm trying to take these pawns. That's basically my plan. Yeah, he's just trying to trade. That's not the right plan though. Like, he's trying to trade too much of the pieces off the board, but he's unaware that he's just down by a piece. Let's just take the pawn and let him trade. Usually, it's best to let them do the capture. Even if the trade has to happen, let them take. So that way you take and you improve your position. Pawn to b5 is a good try, because now if I take, the bishop is able to take my knight. But that's fine. Let's just pull the knight back to c3 and attack his unprotected bishop. He attacks my bishop. I attack his. So if he takes my bishop, I take his bishop. He's not really able to move his bishop away to attack anything for me, because I can always take this rook and then his pawn on b5 is going to be hanging. So bishop to f5 was played. Now we simply take on, let's take the rook first. And then once the rook takes, we take this, because we have to remember that our bishop is hanging. So if we take here, there's bishop g6 and that's annoying. So let's just take the free pawn on b5. Let's keep the bishop targeting f7. We're now ahead by 4 points. Pawn moves. Let's take another pawn. And then from here, it's just a matter of rolling the passed pawn up the board. But the opponent resigns. More Italian game against 700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 700. Let's play some aggressive Italian game. Now, this is the Italian game. And once they play the 2 knights, we're going to be playing the move pawn to d4. If they play bishop to c5, we know about pawn to b4, the Ivan's gambit. And bishop to d6. Okay, bishop to d6 should just be losing. But what do you... Come on, bro. This is breaking opening principles, man. You don't put the bishop in front of the pawn like that. But funny enough, I'm going to take on e5. And bishop takes c5 is what he needs to play. If he okay, he did play bishop takes c5, so that's nice. My plan from here is to eventually take that bishop. Oh, wait. I have an idea. This is something that I learned from another game where I'm going to actually play knight to g5. And yes, I'm breaking principles, but he did it first. I'm fine. Once he castles his king, I hit him with pawn to f4. And if he pulls the bishop back to d6, I hit him with pawn to e5. And all of a sudden, that's a fork. Now, the downside of this is his king is out the center and my king is in the center. So I'm not sure if there's any brilliant sacrifice to punish my king for being in the center of the board. I'm not sure, but I'm not seeing any. So bishop goes back, hit him with e5, that's a fork. Now, queen to e7 is the expected move. Rook to e8 is worse, by the way, because now he's losing more than just a piece. He's gonna... Whoa, because first of all, the rook was guarding f7. It's no longer guarding f7. Now I have 2 pieces targeting f7. So do I take on f7 and then after the king move, I take the rook and then he's still going to be forked? Or do I take on f7 with the knight, hit the queen, force the queen to move, take on d6 with the knight, the bishop checks the king, force the king to move again, then I take the rook. So this is just losing. Let's just take on f7. This is game. I'm attacking the queen. If he doesn't move the queen, he loses the queen. But because the bishop is on the same line as the king, I'm just going to take on d6. And this is called a discovered attack. Moving the knight out the way. Now he has to move the king. Now, once he moves the king, I'm not sure if I needed to check him again. I don't think check him again does anything. So let's just take the rook on e8. And it's funny. I'm already ahead by 6 points. He decides to take with the queen. So now I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board. And just like that, 10 moves into the Italian game. And we're already ahead by 6 points. Okay, knight e4. Very suspicious. Like, okay, knight is not able to go here, 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 here. Let's say I attack the knight. The only way for him to save the knight is to move the knight to c5. So what if I attack the knight with my queen on the d5 square? And look on this, if he tries to guard the knight with his queen, it's a drawback mistake because the queen guards the g8 square and queen to g8 is going to be mate. His knight has nowhere to go. The knight is just trapped. We're about to win even more material. Okay, he plays pawn to a6. So let's just grab the knight. We're now ahead by 9 points, which is crazy. Pawn b5 hits the bishop. Because offense is the best defense, we're going to be putting the bishop on d3, threatening a checkmate on h7. So now he has to play pawn to g6. Preventing the mate. And I'm thinking about playing pawn to f5. Opening this. Yeah, let's just play pawn to f5. I'm ahead by 9 old points. Like anything that I do is just winning. So he took with the knight. Let's just take on g6. He's not able to... Oh. Okay. That was a free rook. That was a free rook. And I missed it. I outright missed that rook. So he's going to defend the rook. And then we're going to be taking another pawn. Or maybe playing pawn to g7 to check the king. So he defended the rook. Now, how do we do this? I need to just trade, to be honest. This is just winning. Okay, let's take on h7. If I'm able to get a bishop on this diagonal, then that's a checkmate. Pawn to d5 I'm expecting. Pawn d5. Now we play queen to f6. And we're already threatening checkmate in one move. My pawn on h7 is also guarded. He is able to play knight takes g3, but I'm just ahead by so many points. Okay, and that's it. That's GG's. Bishop e6. Not only did he blunder, I'm not even going to take the knight. That's just a checkmate. More Italian game against 800 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 800. More Italian game coming your way. Okay, so this is the Italian. The two knights defense is what we're going to be facing today. And now we hit them with pawn to d4, something you can find on chessreps.com. They take with the pawn, we castle. They take with the knight, we take on e5. Okay, bishop to d6. There's a very cool way how I like to punish bishop to d6 because it's breaking principles. Like, you don't be blocking out your bishops like this. So what I like to do is I like to take on e5, and then knight takes e5 is already losing due to knight e5, bishop e5, f4, and then once the bishop move, we fought. So this is bad. It would have been a bit better for him to take with the bishop, but because he takes with the knight, now I'm able to simply take on... Oh, wait. I always mess this up. I need to think. After bishop takes, if I play f4, will there be knight takes e4? Because if I take the bishop, there's queen h4. And if pawn g3, there's knight takes. So if pawn f4, knight takes e4, do I have queen d5? Hit the bishop, hit the knight. Threaten mate. And if queen h4, I still play g3. And if knight takes g3, I take the bishop with check and then take on f4. So we're still going to be playing pawn to f4. That was weird though. Like, I want you guys to notice how anytime you're going to be pushing the f-pawn, whether it's on this direction or the other direction, then it's always going to be like that. He's messaging me asking if he's going to be in a video. Of course you're going to be in a video, bro. And if you want to be in a video, just leave a comment of your username and the ratings and I'll send you a message. Well, he voluntarily put the bishop on d4 and gave me the bishop. So he didn't even let me try. I mean, this is just over, bro. Now he plays pawn to d6, but because I'm ahead in material, no need to do anything too fancy, to be honest. Let's just get the king out the center of the board, develop the knight, develop the bishop, and eventually I'll have so much activity that he's going to be forced to blunder again. So he castled his king. Let's develop our knight, just finishing our development here. Pawn to c5. Now moving the pawn to c5 definitely weakens the pawn on d6. Let's just pull the queen back to d3 here, keeping this guarded. But now the pawn on d6 will become a target. My next move is probably going to be bishop to e3, or I could actually move this pawn to f5 and then try to pin his knight on f6 with some ideas of applying pressure to that pinned knight. Okay, rook to e8 was played. Let's start with the plan. Pawn to f5. It also prevents his bishop from going to e6, which means my light squared bishop is very strong on this diagonal. Now, he could play pawn to h6, but I could also play bishop f4 and target his pawn on d6 instead. Now that he plays pawn to a6, it's quite evident that he wants to play b5. But okay, now we're actually going for the king. I'm trying to checkmate his king now. Pin the knight, allow him to play pawn to b5. Nah. Apply pressure to the knight, let him take. Nah, let's just play a4. This is prophylaxis. He's trying to play b5. Let's just prevent him from playing b5. Then we try to go with our plan of bishop g5. So bishop goes back to d7. Let's hit them with bishop to g5. The knight is pinned. What's the next step once the knight is pinned? PP on the PP. And if he plays h6, I'm just going to maintain the pin on the knight. Once you're able to apply pressure to a pinned knight, it's going to expose the opponent's king and they're going to be getting checkmated. So guy still played pawn b5. He's so hesitant. Okay, how do we win this game? Knight d5, give him the bishop. Let's takes. And then if he takes, I play check. That's not mate though. That's not mate. Okay, that's fine. Let's take on a3. It's not going to be leading to a mate, but his king is going to be super exposed. Pawn takes. How does this work? Let's take the rook, and then once the queen takes, we take the knight so that we were able to expose his king. And once we take his knight, he's not really able to take our bishop because queen g3 could very well be a checkmate. So once the queen moves, we get rid of the knight, and now we're just exposing his king. Now once he takes, my bishop is under attack. I'm thinking of checking him first, so that way if he moves the king, I'm able to take the free pawn on f7. Okay, he did take the pawn. Let's play queen to g3, check the king. I'm targeting d6, but I'm not really trying to win d6 here. Now my bishop is under attack. I was planning on attacking his queen, but let's just take the pawn. Now his rook is under attack. If my queen was able to take on f6, that would be a mate. I'm assuming he's going to attack my bishop. And once he attacks my bishop, I pull it back to hit his queen. And then I try to take one of these pawns. And that's how he's going to be getting mated. Well, he moved the rook out the way, didn't attack my bishop or anything, which means I'm able to take on d6, attack his unprotected bishop, and threaten the checkmate on his unprotected pawn. And I'm ahead by 5 points. So this is now just game. He pulls the bishop back to e8. Doesn't help because that's just a checkmate. More Italian game against 900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 900. Let's play some aggressive Italian game. Now this is the Italian. We're welcoming them to play the 2 knights defense, and we're not going to be going for any fried liver attack in this video. Once they play knight f6, we play the move pawn to d4, allowing them to take, get the king out the center of the board. So our king is going to be castled and the center of the board is going to be open. So once they take, let's just castle the king. Bishop to c5 was played. This is a very natural move, by the way, because everyone is just trying to finish their development. Plus, he's defending the pawn on d4. But now I like to play the move pawn to e5, immediately attacking the knight. And if the knight goes to g4, we sack the bishop on f7, play knight g5, and that's completely winning. If the knight goes to e4, we should be able to play bishop to d5, and the knight is almost trapped. Pawn to d5 is the most testing way to play against it. But in this particular scenario, we should be able to just take on f6, allowing them to take our bishop, because now we take on g7, attacking the position is equal, by the way. So this is just a normal position with his king in the center of the board. Now, he has the bishop here, I'm not going to lie, and these 2 pawns gives him very good control over the center of the board. So this is where we have to ensure that we use the little initiative that we have. We don't want to be making moves like h3 or a3 or wasting time. So I'm going to hit him with the move bishop to g5, immediately hit the queen, because we have to start our attack. The plan is to eventually play rook to e1, by the way. So for example, if f6, rook e1, and then he won't be able to block with the bishop. If queen d7, there's rook e1. I think he needs to play something like queen d5. And then if I play rook e1, bishop e6. Now that f6 is played, we're not going to be playing the move rook to e1, checking the king. And you could say we're forcing him to move the king. And okay, if he has to move the king, we achieved what we wanted out of the opening anyways, because positions like these, usually in order to get positions like these, you have to like sacrifice a pawn, but the position is equal, which is nice. King f7 I'm expecting. King f7, I need to find somewhere for my bishop. Bishop to e7 is a blunder, by the way, because the bishop is now pinned. And what do we know about pinned pieces? Pinned pieces doesn't protect. So now I'm able to play the move bishop takes f6. Because the bishop is not able to take my bishop due to the king in the center of the board. So his king is in the center of the board and everything, and I'm ahead by a pawn. White is winning here. And by the way, if you want to play against me, just type your username in the comment with the ratings, and I'll send you a message on chess.com. Okay, queen to d6 was played, attacking my bishop on f6. Okay, now we have to do something about the bishop that is under attack. And I think the best thing to do here is just to take the bishop. Take the bishop. Once the knight takes the knight. Then he takes, and then I just develop, and I'm fine. Is there anything better here, though? I mean, my bishop is under attack. I don't want to waste any time. So let's just take the bishop. The knight now has to take. Now we should be able to take on d4. And there's also some queen to h5 check ideas. We're ahead by 2 pawns, by the way. I mean, I'm assuming that he's going to take on g7 very, very early. So let's just say we're ahead by 1 pawn, which means trading pieces is also benefiting us. Plus this pawn on c4, I'm sure that's a dead pawn. But he decides to play bishop to d7 because he wants to run his king out the center of the board, and I want to keep his king in the center of the board. So the move I'm thinking of here is queen to e2, so that way if he castle, I take the knight. But that's not going to work, because if queen e2, he is able to castle, and if I take the knight, he plays rook to e8, and if I take the queen or move the queen, I'm checkmated. So I wanted to just develop my knight, but I'm trying to check him first. Check? Yeah, let's check him first. Let's check the king first. So, because now he has to find the best defense. Queen to g6, let's say I take and then he takes. Do I have anything? I don't think I have anything. So if queen to g6, I may play something like queen to e5. Threatening that, nah, that will not work. We spoke about that. So queen to e6, queen to c5. Yeah. Queen to g6, we play queen to c5, threatening mate. He's still able to castle. No, he's not able to castle anymore. What is this? If queen to c5, there's rook g7 and he's threatening mate. Okay, I'm just gonna convert this slowly. Because once I move the queen, he plays rook to g7. Pawn to g3 is something, but it's not like I'm attacking or anything. So let's just trade the queens off the board and then develop my last piece, trying to win this pawn. So for example, something like, okay, knight d2, there's pawn b5. So let's play knight a3, putting the knight on the edge of the board. If he plays pawn b5, I take. Now if he takes on g7, I simply take on c4. And we're just ahead by 2 pawns in the endgame. It's not bad, you know? It's not bad. This should be enough to win. From here, it's just a matter of trades. Okay, the king is castled out the center of the board safely. Let's play rook to d1, getting all our pieces in the game. Now every piece is now playing a role, and we're just ahead by 2 pawns. So this should be winning for white. Okay, king to b8 was played. What I'm noticing with king to b8 is that's a blunder, and that's actually a drawback blunder, because the king was guarding the rook. It's no longer guarding the rook, which means the rook is unprotected and my rook is on the same line as his rook, which means once I hit him with the move knight e6, that's actually a fork. If he takes, then he loses a rook. Well, he's able to take, and then when I take, he blocks with the bishop. So he loses an exchange, like 2 points. And if he moves the rook back, I take the rook. And if he takes my knight, I take his knight. So this is now just over. So he decides to move the rook. Let's just take the rook. And the funny thing is, both his knight and his bishop is hanging. So once he takes with the rook, now we just need to take his knight. We're going to be taking the bishop on the next move. So this is now just GG's. The bishop is also pinned. If he tries to guard it with the king, we just apply pressure to the pin piece. Pawn to b5, I'm not even going to do this first. Let's just play knight e5. Now we're really going to be taking the bishop. This is like the whole idea of PP on the PP. And he resigns. More Italian game against 1,000 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,000. We're still going to be playing some more aggressive Italian game. Knight c6, let's go bishop c4. This is the Italian game. We're welcoming knight f6 so that way we're able to play pawn to d4. And we already know if they play bishop c4, there's the Ivan's Gambit, there's c3 followed by d4. So let's see how this guy's going to react to this. He takes with the pawn. Now we castle the king. And if the knight takes on e4, we play knight c3. So the knight did take on e4. Now we play knight c3. And if they play pawn takes, there's bishop f7 followed by queen takes. Like, I don't think we're going to see any of that. Knight takes c3 is actually the critical move that we need to learn, because when they play knight takes c3, we play pawn takes c3, and then once they play pawn d5, we need to pin the knight hand. This is now our quest to keep their king in the center of the board, but a very good defensive way for black here is to play pawn d. Well, not that. That's not it. That's being greedy, bro. He's ahead by 3 pawns. That is not it. How do we punish this guy for being greedy? The first move that stood out to me is queen to d5. Queen to d5 threatens checkmate, which means he has to guard it by moving the queen. Oh my lord, if the queen goes to e7, then rook e1 and the queen is pinned. If the queen goes to f6, then there's queen f6, and that's more pressure on the queen. So hitting him with queen to d5 is already very, very strong. This is the Knack Manson Gambit. Okay, so the queen goes to f6 to defend against the mate. Now we're going to be trying to do removing the guard. So now we're going to develop our bishop and attack the queen. So now we're down by 3 pawns, but the guy's king is still in the center of the board, and that's our goal. Keep the king in the center of the board and attack him. Queen to e6, the queen is pinned. Knight back to e7 is an interesting move, because if I take his queen, he takes my queen. But do we move the queen? Or do we just not move the queen and hit him with rook to e1, swinging more pieces in the game, because pin pieces doesn't protect. And if they don't protect, they definitely don't attack. So now he still has to move the queen. Okay, what piece do I have that is not doing anything? The a8 rook. But my rooks are connected, you know, like, I don't think I need to use my a rook to win this game. Maybe rook b1 or rook d1 to put it on a file. But apart from that, the only developed and active piece that he has is his queen, which is about to be attacked. The knight is pinned, bishop is undeveloped, king is in the center, bishop is undeveloped, rooks haven't moved, because he's greedy, because he wanted to be ahead by 3 points. Okay, now he plays pawn to c6. All right, so this guy's really Using the offense is the best defense to a level. I'm thinking queen a5 here. Okay, how do I do this? Queen e4, like I personally would like to play queen e4, but then there's pawn d5. Takes, 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 and then he just moves the queen. Okay, we need to find some more safe for the queen. I'm also not trying to trade queens. Let's play, it's between queen a5 and queen d3. Let's play queen d3. If he plays queen g6, then I take on c3. I'm also thinking of taking on e7, then playing something like queen e3 to apply pressure to his pinned bishop. Oh my lord, he played queen to f5. He's about to resign. He played queen to f5 thinking he's about to trade queens. But the knight is pinned, bro. Pin pieces don't protect. I'm sorry, that's a free queen. It's over. It's now GG's. Okay, pawn to f6, and from here we're going to be going for checkmate. I mean, I'm ahead by an entire queen. Let's sacrifice the bishop. Knight is still not able to take my queen. And then after pawn takes, we take it the rook. And okay, there's also no squares for the rook because my bishop is covering that square, which is why he played pawn d5. But now we're just going to be taking the rook, and now this should be GG's. If he takes my bishop, I finally swing my last piece in the game. He takes the bishop. Let's just swing the rook in the game here. And the opponent resigns. More Italian against 1200 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. And we're going to be playing some more aggressive Italian game. Knight f6, hit them with pawn to d4. Now, once they take, just get the king out the center of the board, volunteering to sacrifice another pawn. Now, I've seen a lot of persons playing bishop e7 here. Haven't seen a lot of bishop to c5, to be honest. But because this king is in the center of the board, I should be able to get away with the move pawn to e5. Now, usually when you play pawn to e5, their immediate response should be pawn to d5. But if this happens, I take, pawn takes, then take on g7, hit the rook. And then once the rook move, I play bishop g5, hit the queen. And his king is still in the center of the board, so I will get some attack from this. Whenever they put their knight on g4, it means my pawn on e5 is under attack twice. So I have to be careful. I like the idea of playing rook to e1 to guard the pawn, but pawn to d3 could apply a lot of pressure to f2. Oh, okay. Wait, did I miss this? Whenever the knight goes to g4, we should be able to sacrifice our bishop. Sacrifice the bishop and then play knight g5 check. If there's a game in this video where I missed it and I play rook to e1, I'm so sorry. But we need to sacrifice the bishop because the knight is unprotected and the queen is on the same line as the knight. So we sacrifice the bishop with check, and then once the king takes, we play knight g5, hit the king, take back the knight, and then white is winning. So once the king takes, we play knight g5 check. I mean, if he sacks his queen, we're just going to take it. And if he moves the king, we grab the knight, and his king is just going to be on the run. Okay, he decides to put the king on e7. Doesn't matter. No, we're going to take the knight. The position is equal, which means white is just winning because his king is just not safe. And this is like the safest king that we have. Knight takes e5. Okay, he's trying to grab a pawn. Okay, he's also attacking my queen, by the way, so I need to be careful. But just a simple queen to e4 should be winning here because his knight is now pinned to the king. And we know what to do when a piece is pinned. I'm going to be applying pressure to that pin piece. So if he doesn't want to lose the knight, he has to use the king to guard the knight. Like king to d6, which should still be losing to bishop f4. So he plays pawn to d6 to guard the knight, but whenever a piece is pinned, we pp on the pp. Pawn f4 applying pressure to the pinned knight. I mean, whenever you're going to play a move like pawn f4, just be aware of the fact that you're kind of weakening your king. So he could actually play pawn to d3, discover a check on my king. But if he does that, I'm just going to move the king. And then if he takes on c2, I'm just going to move the knight. His knight is still dead. So he checks. Let's move the king. If he take on c2, well, can I allow him to queen though? Like if he takes on c2, I take, and then he take on b1. Like, do I have checkmate here? Okay, he didn't even go for any of that. He played rook to f8, which is very interesting because now his knight is untouchable. Because if I take the knight, I'm actually mated. So let's not take that knight. I mean, knight takes h7 is interesting because it hits the rook. But then there's bishop f5. So very interesting move from the opponent there. Okay, let's just develop. Let's play knight to c3 here. Knight to d5 check is also an idea. I'm not sure if I'm going to win this knight though, which is crazy. Because bishop to f5, queen d1, bishop takes d3. Okay, maybe at that point I take. It's very tricky. Let's see. Okay, bishop to f5. Very good defense, by the way. Very good defense. Let's pull the queen all the way back to e1 though. I'm going to take that back. Bishop to f5 isn't really good because no, I'm able to take the knight. His rook is no longer going to be taking my rook, and my queen is also guarding my rook. Maybe he thinks he's winning a pawn, which he is, but now I'm winning the knight. So he plays h6 to hit the knight. That's fair. What he's seeing is if he takes my knight, I take his knight. But what he's not seeing is his king is in the center on the same diagonal as his queen. So if he takes my knight, my bishop jumps in and I'm winning his queen. Unless he blocks with the rook, but then I'll take the rook and hit the king. So just taking the knight here is completely winning. Okay, he did take my knight, which means bishop takes g5 is a skewer, forcing the more valuable piece to move out the way. And then we take the lesser valuable piece. If he takes with if he blocks with the rook, now we take the rook. This is a double check, by the way. So the king still has to move. Maybe king to d7 is a move here, though. Like probably I should have played knight to d5. But no buts. Because if I takes, queen takes, I'm not able to promote. I'm ahead by an entire rook. Oh, that's a bishop. That's just a hanging bishop. Okay, this is just game. We're ahead by 8 points here. Okay, he took with the pawn. Let's attack the queen, force the queen to move. Now we're trying to set up some checkmates. Okay, queen moves to f8. Just moving his queen out the way. I'll need all my pieces in the game. Okay, let's just take this pawn on d3. No need to rush. Okay, bishop to d4. That's very creative because if I take his bishop, he takes my rook. But let's just play knight to e4, just applying more defense to my bishop. So if he takes my bishop, I take with check, hit the king. Oh, but then he take on b2, and then if I take his bishop, he's still going to be taking my rook. But again, that's fine. Let's play rook to b1, hitting the bishop, forcing it to move. Now all my pieces are very active. Bishop d4, we're still not going to be taking. Okay, let me play queen to f1, guarding my rook. So that way I'm threatening to take the bishop. Now he has to do something. Take my bishop or move away his bishop. Now he took. Let's take with check, hit the king. I'm ahead by 8 points here, by the way. Like, there should be some checkmate here, depending on where he puts the queen. He has no time on the clock. With that being said, more Italian game against 1200 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1200. Let's play some more aggressive Italian game. Let's hit the pawn. And then once the knight defends it, we're not just going to be playing the Italian game, welcoming the two knights defense, hit them with pawn to d4. And this is where they usually do take the pawn, and then you just get your king out the center of the board. And this is where your whole game plan is, okay, I'm going to prevent them from castling. Pawn to g6 I haven't seen, which means it's a mistake. Why would you play pawn to g6? I think he's trying to go bishop g7 and castle. First thing I notice is knight g5 doesn't work due to knight e5. Pawn e5 is what I usually play in these types of scenarios. Pawn e5, pawn d5. And then if I takes, he takes. Okay, that's actually not bad. Pawn e5, pawn d5. Bishop b5. Once he moves the knight, I take. Okay, let's play rook to e1 first. And then if he puts the bishop on g7, then I play pawn e5. So that way there's no pawn d5, which is why he played pawn to d6. All right, what can we do now? Well, because that king is in the center of the board, we're still going to play e5 because the goal is to open the center. And then he took with the pawn. Knight g5, no. Knight g5, bishop e6. Nah. Okay, takes, knight takes, check. Okay, let's play knight g5. I'm down by 2 pawns. I'm about to win back a pawn. Knight takes c5 was also nice. Rook takes, bishop e7. I was thinking bishop g5 or bishop h6 there. And there was some knight g4 ideas that I wasn't comfortable with. But now I can play knight g5 because there's no knight e5. And this king is still in the center of the board. Oh, and by the way, if you want to play against me, just comment your username on the ELA and I'll send you a message to play. So knight d5 automatically reminds me of the fried liver attack. Like, what if we sacrifice the knight on f7? The king takes on f7, we play queen to f3 check. Okay, the king is going to play to f6. And then there's no knight c3 due to take. But what if we play immediate queen to f3? Immediate queen to f3, there's more than likely there's bishop e6. With that being said, I'm thinking of playing pawn c3 first. Because takes, check, there's king up. I don't really have much. So let's play pawn c3. We're down by 2 pawns. We should be able to get back at least one of the pawns here. Knight to a5 is interesting. Very interesting. Okay, what if we sack no? And then once the king takes, we check. And then once the king goes here... Oh, come on, bro. What am I doing? That's a drawback mistake. The knight on c6 was guarding e5. It's no longer guarding e5. That's a blunder. Because now we take on e5 with check, and I'm attacking the knight. So knight a5 was a complete blunder, bro. The funny thing is, even if he tries to block with the knight, it's also going to be hanging both f7 and the knight on a5. Let's say he blocks with the bishop. I think we just take this knight. Maybe sack the knight on f7 first. Okay, bishop to e6 was played. How does this work? If we take on f7, there's king f7. So let's just take on e6, hit the queen, which means he has to take back. Then we take on e6 again with check. So now the position is equal. He blocks with the bishop. And from here, I'm just trying to apply more pressure to this pinned bishop. My bishop is under attack though, so that's kind of tricky. What if I play queen to a5 check? Just to protect the bishop. And then if queen d7, I sack the rook. Oh, yeah, and then after king takes, I take the knight. That should be good. Because if I take, there's queen takes. And I mean, I could... No, I can't take there. I lose the rook. Okay, let's start with queen to a4. I like this idea because the king is exposed, the knight is unprotected. Pawn to c6 may try to guard the knight. Knight back to c6, which means now my bishop is no longer under attack. So now it gives me some free time to continue with some attack on him. I need to finish my development though. Can we sacrifice the rook though? That's a forcing move. Take the knight, and if he takes, I check, and I'm hitting both the knight and his king. If he blocks with the queen, I take the queen or the knight. That's winning. So now the position is equal. I mean, from a material standpoint. But 2 knights is definitely better than a rook. And I'm about to win 2 knights and a pawn for the rook. Remember, we speak about this, guys. We find forcing moves by looking on moves on the opponent's half of the board, checks, captures, and threats. Rook takes c6 is winning. Need to finish my development though. This is kind of crazy right here. So once he takes, let's play queen c6, and I'm checking the king. Queen blocks, loses the rook, by the way, and that's what he did. So not only am I going to take the knight, I'm first going to take the unprotected rook, and I'm going to say check. Now I'm ahead by 4 points. He blocks with the queen. Now I take the knight on d4. Now I'm ahead by 7 points, and this is just GG's. Okay, he blocks with the bishop because he doesn't want to trade. I'm sorry, bro, but that's just a checkmate. More Italian game against 1300 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1300. Let's play some more aggressive Italian game, which you can find on chessreps.com. Now, the 2 knights defense is played. Now we hit them with immediate pawn to d4. And then once they play pawn takes d4, we just get the king out the center of the board. Ooh, knight takes e4 was played, and I present to you, my fellow viewers, the Mack Hansen gambit. This is such a crazy gambit because declining the gambit is actually bad. Accepting the gambit is super risky. Like, you refute this gambit by after pawn takes, bishop takes, king takes, queen to d5, you have to play king to f6. Who is going to play king to f6? So he decides to play knight takes c3 instead, which is smart. Because if he plays pawn takes c3, I was going to check and win back the knight anyways. So let's take back on c3 here. And then, something like pawn to d5 should be okay. Immediate bishop to e7 is also very, very strong. Because you need to just get the king out the center as quickly as possible. Alright, so immediate pawn to d5 was played. I'm thinking of just checking the king here. I mean, if I check the king, he's just going to block, to be honest. And then I pin the knight, he's just going to castle. And if I pin the knight first, let's pin the knight first. First, let's pin the knight, so that way I'm threatening some ideas of applying pressure to the knight, and I'm also threatening some ideas of checking on e1. Okay, immediate bishop to g4 was played, and immediate bishop to g4 is interesting because the guy's basically saying, I know that you're trying to apply pressure to my pinned knight, so I'm going to develop my bishop and pin your knight. But now I'm able to start my attack with this king in the center of the board. That was actually my whole point, bro. It wasn't really to try to do this. I'm trying to attack your king. So now, my fellow viewers, and only now, we hit him with rook to e1. And once we play rook to e1 and he blocks with the bishop, I'm thinking about just applying some pressure to this pinned bishop now. For example, bishop to a3. Wait, if bishop to a3, he castle. So I think I have to take the knight first, then bishop to a3. At that point, there's bishop to e6. Then I take it the bishop, but then he's able to take a free bishop. Takes, check. Okay, take the knight first. There's just so much happening here. What if I play queen takes d4 and attack the unprotected bishop? And then if he takes my knight, I take on g7 first and attack the unprotected rook. And then once he plays rook to f8, I play bishop h6, attack the rook again. Which one of these is better? Take the knight, apply pressure to the bishop, allow the bishop to go back to e6. If I take on d4, he takes a free piece. So I have to take on e7, then take on e4, but then he gets the castle. So it has to be queen d4. Because the bishop is unprotected and g7 is unprotected and the knight is pinned. So let's go queen takes d4. It's very important that we try to play the most aggressive move in the position. And being able to spot these moves, again, is being able to spot these kind of weaknesses. Are you able to see that the bishop on e7 is pinned and pinned pieces don't protect, which means the bishop is not going to be able to go to f6 and hit the queen? Are you able to see that you're just not, the knight on c6 is not able to play if you play queen takes? Are you able to see that, okay, bishop takes f3, we don't have to take back on f3. We're able to take on g7 and play what is called an in-between move. And usually in these types of position, bishop f6 is the defense, but the bishop is pinned, which means I'm just threatening to take the rook with check. But are you able to see that once the rook moves and we play bishop h6, we still don't have to take this bishop? Actually, maybe not, because it does threaten to play queen takes f8, and the bishop is not able to take. But maybe if I play bishop h6, he plays bishop e4. We still have to remember that we're down by a piece. We still want to eventually win the bishop back. So bishop h6, bishop e4. There's bishop to a3, but there's always going to be bishop to e4. With that being said, we just have to take now. Let's take here. If I take the queen move, and then I still have time to take the knight and then apply some pressure to the pinned bishop. So let's take here. Like, I actually don't want to take, though. I want to play an attacking move like maybe bishop g5, but the bishop e4 is just such a good defense. Bishop e3, there's just bishop e4. So we have to take. We just have to take. Okay, there's no rook to g1, which is good. The bishop is still pinned. I think he should play something like queen to d6 and just get the queens off the board, because right now the position is equal. Like, I'm not ahead by a pawn and I have the worst pawn structure known to mankind. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind when it comes to evaluating a position based on pawn structure is not important if piece activity is playing a higher role than pawn structure. So for example, if I could get my pieces to just be this active, is king, can, castle, and all of those stuff, I don't need to worry about my pawns. But with that being said, what if I don't get anything from this attack? What if the guy's just able to castle and consolidate? Then my pawn structure becomes something to evaluate in the position. And this is why strong players are strong, because eventually you have to know how to identify the small things in the position. But for now, the main thing that is happening is just I'm trying to keep his king in the center of the board. Okay, let's calculate. What if he plays queen d6? Queen d6, we get rid of the... Okay, queen d6 was played. So queen d6, because he's trying to castle on the next move, clearly. Queen g4 doesn't really work. So get rid of the queen. No, get rid of the knight so that we were able to apply pressure to the bishop. That's the plan. So check, queen takes, pp on the pp. Oh my God, he's just going to castle. Yo, that's such a strong move. If I get rid of the knight and then play bishop to a3, thinking he's not able to castle, he just castle. Okay, what if I check him at that point? Because if I take the bishop, there's rook g8. So if I check him at that point and then the king moves, if f5 I take, and if queen block I take. So once the king moves, I take on e7. And then once he plays rook g8, I play bishop to g5. And then he's going to play h6, and then I'm going to play h4. Then he's going to play f6, and then I'm going to play f4. We're still going to be going for it. So let's take on c6 with check. Once the queen takes, we play bishop a3 and he castle. Castle is a very good move because I'm assuming he sees the whole idea of the fact that my queen is on the same line as the king. Like, these are the stuff that you guys need to be able to notice in order to be good at tactics. Now, pawn takes, I don't see why you would play pawn takes. Oh, of course. Because now there's no bishop a3, but at least there's not really a good place for his king to get castled. What if I try bishop g5? Oh boy. Bishop, look at this. Bishop to g5 allows him to play f6, right? But all of a sudden, my queen becomes one of the pieces that is applying pressure to his bishop. So after he plays h6, I'm going to play bishop h6. Now I'm threatening to take his rook, and he's not going to be able to castle because then I have queen takes e7. That's actually pretty funny. Oh my God. But what if I play bishop to g5 and he still decides to castle? Okay. Okay, and then I take the bishop with the rook, and then he plays rook to g8. No, what am I doing? Let's play bishop g5. If he castle and I take with the bishop, I'm attacking his queen. So if rook to g8, I should be able to just take his queen. And then if he takes my queen, I block with the bishop. Okay, which means everything I just said was fine. Then if f6, there's bishop h6, and if he castle, I take it the queen, and if rook g8, I just take the queen. And if he takes my queen, I block. Chilling. In some cases, if rook g8, I could also, I can't sack my rook because rook takes is a check. Never mind. I'm not gonna lie, this guy's 1300. I'm sure you guys know him. He has been representing the 1300 for too long though. I'm not gonna lie, bro. It's time for you to start representing the 1400 because this guy beat me in that Italian game video, and all the games with him are usually so hard. The next time we play, you need to be a 1400 player. Okay, pawn to f6. Let's go bishop h6. We're threatening the rook, and his king is really not able to get castled. So I think we got what we wanted, and I'm not down by a pawn, so I'm chilling. This is just a dynamic position. I have a bad pawn structure. It's not the safest king in the world, but he's not able to attack it. His pawn structure is not the best as well. I mean, mine is worse, but hey, I'm the one who's going to be attacking, especially if he allows me to double up my rooks on the e-file. He's not going to allow that, though. I need to just find a clever way to quickly get my a-rook in the game. Okay, that's a very nice move. King to d7 is a very nice move. You see, I tell you, this guy's he's finding a lot of good moves. He's just finding them. Because now he's threatening to play rook to g8, so I have to be careful. I'm thinking of playing queen to g4 check. There's definitely pawn to f5. Okay, can I just take on f8? And then if he takes my queen, I take on e7 with check. Takes, takes, king takes, takes. And I'm ahead by a pawn. Or pawn f5, takes, takes, check. He moves the king, I check, king takes, takes, takes. And then I'm ahead by a pawn. I think I'm ahead by a pawn in that line, though. I need to play faster. Because my king is also about to be attacked. Queen takes h7 seems to be very risky. Queen h7 check. King h1. Okay, this is just weird. How about bishop f4? Bishop f4, there's rook g8 still. And if I take the queen, he takes my queen, and then I have to block. If I take on g7, h7, okay, maybe I should take on h7. Yeah, let's take on h7. If he checks, I play king h1, and I have some ideas of playing queen f5. I think queen g4 would have been something, and then I would have gone into an endgame where I'm ahead by a pawn, but I'm trying to get more from the position, which is, I'm not gonna lie, that's kind of a bit greedy, but let's see. Okay, rook moves, I check. That was the whole idea of rook to h8, and now I'm able to play bishop f4 and then hit the queen. That was the whole idea. So, and the good thing is, once he moves the king, his rooks are no longer connected. So bishop f4 hits the queen. This was the point. This was the point. Maybe if he had played rook to g8 check, it still wouldn't work. I would have just played king h1. So now I'm expecting queen c5. Queen c5, there's pawn c4. Queen takes c4. Okay, he checks. Let's just move. Let's just move. Let's not waste time. Queen c5, pawn c4, queen c4, bishop c7, king c7, knight check. Okay, pawn. Okay, there's queen f2 though. Check, check, check. Oh, what is this though? There's queen f2 though. All right, let's pull the bishop back to g3 to guard f2. I have 55 seconds on the clock. I have a little idea though to sack my bishop, and then after the king takes, I take on e7. But it doesn't work if the queen guards the bishop. So if he takes on c3, I could consider it. Okay, I need to get my rook in the game actually. I'm not gonna think about another attacking move until I get my rook in the game. Because if I could get my rook in the game, at least I could say I have more pieces in the game. So then it's gonna be easier for me to just sack it. So for example, queen takes. Okay, takes, check. King up, check. King move. Okay, I'm gonna do it. Oh my god, I'm not sure if this works though. Okay, takes on c7, then we check. And now his king is on the run, but my king is also on the run. Like any one of us could be getting checkmated here. It would be so funny if I blundered my a rook, because that would be a checkmate. Hopefully I don't do it. King to east. Okay, let's check here. No, I'm not blundering the rook. He moves the king, and then the plan was to go here. Because once I go here, I'm also threatening to play rook to a3, and that's going to be a checkmate. So now he has to put the queen somewhere where he guards the a3 square, but guarding the a3 square gives up the d3 square. So that's another check. And if he moves the king, that's mate. If he blocks with the queen, we win the queen. So it did work. That's crazy. So he blocks with the queen, and this is now just mating too. We check on a3, the queen has to block, and that's just a checkmate. More Italian game against 1,400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,400, and we're still going to be going for the aggressive version of the Italian. So whenever they play knight to f6, now we play d4. Now d3 is the positional version of the Italian. We're going to be playing pawn to d4, and this is going to be welcoming some very serious gambits. Now, as you guys could see, the opponent is already thinking for an entire minute, because moves like these they're not expecting. They usually see maybe the fried liver attack, or just pawn to d3 to guard the pawn, or just knight c3 to guard the pawn. Now, he took with the pawn. Maybe he's expecting me to take back. Maybe he's expecting me to push. But no, I'm just going to get my king out the center of the board. So my king is now safe. His king is now in the center of the board. And this is where I'm going to be like, are you going to be taking a second pawn? He didn't. Now, that's the thing. A lot of persons are always going to be playing moves like bishop e7 because they're afraid. And they're like, okay, I need to ensure that I get my king out the center of the board. But I'm not going to make castling that easy for him. Let's play pawn to e5. Now we're going to be starting some attack, because pawn to d5 no longer works. If they try pawn to d5, we take the knight, they take our bishop, we take another bishop. So this knight has to move. Now he plays knight g4. But now we have to be a bit careful. If you notice, he's attacking our pawn on e5 twice. So we don't really want to play pawn to h3 to chase the knight out as yet, because he's just going to be taking the pawn. So first we're going to be playing the move rook to e1, just guarding the pawn, adding an additional defender to the pawn. The thing is though, his knight is now misplaced. So if he tries to get his king out the center of the board now, that's when I'm going to hit him with pawn to h3, and he's going to be forced to put his knight on the edge of the board, and that's what he did. So now we hit him with pawn to h3, and his knight is now on the edge of the board. And because the knight is on the edge of the board, we're just going to take it. And just like that, his king is exposed. So he got the chance to get his king out the center of the board, but the king is exposed. And keep in mind, knight takes d4. This just looks like a good move, to be honest. But I'm going to play pawn to c3. He was ahead by a pawn. I could simply take back my pawn, but I'm going to sacrifice the pawn. I have a lead in development. Imagine a world where he decides to take the pawn and then I play knight takes c3. Then we would evaluate the position, and we know how to evaluate the position. The first thing that we're thinking about is king safety. My king is safer. Now we're talking about piece activity. All my pieces would have been doing something. So he decides to counterattack in the center of the board and then play pawn to d5. But I'm still going to take en passant, because once I take en passant, I know I'm going to take back my pawn, and then I'm going to have a pawn in the center of the board, and then my knight is going to be going to d3. So he took with his bishop. Let's just play pawn takes d4, taking with the pawn. The position is now equal. By the way, the upside of black's position, I would say, is the fact that he has the bishop here. Apart from having the bishop here, I think white, everything about white is better. Now, his bishop is not developed. My bishop is not developed. With that being said, I would expect him to go bishop f5, and then I would play something like immediate knight c3. And then it's just a matter, okay, he did play bishop f5, so I'm going to play knight c3. And now it's just a matter of who could get more pieces in the game quicker. My rook is already in the game, by the way. So he has 3 minor pieces. I have 3 minor pieces, but I have a pawn in the center. And I have a rook in the game. And his king is exposed. Queen to f6. Guy's playing aggressive because he's trying to connect his rooks. You know, we could also say he's applying some pressure to my pawn on d4. And maybe he wants to play queen g6 and then start pointing his pieces towards my king side. But I don't think f6 is the right score for the queen, though, because it allows me to play this move knight d5. And then knight d5 is just a tempo on the queen. And I could imagine someone playing queen to g6. So that way he's able to play bishop takes h3, you know, those little ideas. But I should be able to just play knight h4, hit the queen, hit the bishop, take the bishop, and then he's not going to have the bishop here anymore. So let's hit him with the move knight d5. I think he would have just played queen d7 to connect his rook, but queen to f6 connects the rook, allow me to put a piece on his half of the board with tempo. So my next move could be queen to d2, connecting my rooks. Okay, he pulls the queen all the way back to d8. Guys, white is better because everything I just told you about the position showed you that I had a slight advantage. I basically still have everything. I gain a tempo with a knight on d5, and it is my turn to play. So what am I going to do? I'm going to continue with the tempo because now I have the initiative. So all my move now, I want them to be attacking move, queen to d2. So I'm also connecting my rooks. I'm bringing more pieces in the game, but I'm also attacking his unprotected pawn on h6. So now he has to spend another precious move of his to defend the h6 pawn. So he found it. He played king to g7. And in these types of position, we're like, okay, do we have any forcing moves? Can I aggressively put a piece on his half of the board? Do I have a check? Can I take something? If you don't have a check, a capture, or a threat, or anything of that sort, just find the piece that you have that is not doing anything and just put it on a good score. So for example, this rook on a1, it should be going on either c1 or d1, d1 to guard the pawn on d4, or just c1 to put the rook on the open file. I think they're both good, but just because it's an isolated pawn, I'm just going to give it some additional defense, especially if I want to play something like knight e5, then, both my rooks are going to be chilling in the center of the board. So now I could confidently say all my pieces are doing something. His king is weak, his rooks are not yet connected, and none of his rooks aren't really doing anything. Okay, pawn to b5. That's a surprising move. I don't know why he would even play pawn to b5. I mean, I think I have a little idea on why he do it, but maybe he wants me to take on b5. I mean, it's an unprotected pawn. The guy gave me a gift. I'm going to take it. But what I need to be aware of is if I take on b5, there's a drawback to this. I'm leaving my knight on d5 unprotected. And because I'm leaving my knight on d5 unprotected and his queen is on the same line as the knight, he should be able to play bishop h2 check. And then once I take his bishop, maybe with the king or with the knight, haven't decided as yet, his queen is going to take my knight and attack my bishop. In my defense, he's giving me a bishop and a pawn just to take my knight in the center of the board. I mean, is the knight in the center of the board that strong? We're taking it. We're going for that trade. Yeah, that's what he went for. All of a sudden, we're just ahead by a pawn. The question is, how do we take? I don't necessarily want to take with the king, to be honest. But then take with the knight kind of undevelop the knight, so it's tricky. So let's say we take with the king and he takes with the queen, hit the bishop, hit the pawn. I mean, I'm ahead by a pawn. I should be able to get away with just getting rid of the knight. Okay, let's give up the bishop. I'm ahead by a pawn. And then once the queen takes, I'm able to now play moves like queen to f5. Hit the bishop. If the bishop move, rook to c1, hit the pawn, knight t5. His king is still not safe. Let's take with the king. And I want my queen on f4, so that way he has no check on this diagonal. So again, I'm ahead by a pawn. Let's give up the bishop for a knight because we're ahead by a pawn. And then once he takes, I have a set of attacking moves I could play. White has to be better here. So the question is, do we start with knight e5 or bishop f4? I think eventually I'm going to want to do both of them. Let's start with queen f4. Queen f4 hits the unprotected bishop. For a moment, I'm thinking about him playing queen d6, trying to trade. And then the bishop decides to go back, just to guard the king. Makes some sense. Pawn to d5 hits the queen. The queen is just going to move. Knight e5 hits the queen. The queen is just going to move. So with that being said, let's put our rook on his 7th rank. Rook's on the 7th is in heaven, and we're targeting his pawn on c7 twice. So, we still have an initiative. It's still a move that he has to react to. Queen to d6 in this position would still be an interesting move, like just not guarding the pawn and be like, okay, let's just get the queens off the board. But because I'm the one who's ahead by the pawn, if he wants to get the queens off the board, I'm fine with that. Okay, there's no buts. I was about to say knight e5 when queen d6, but my rook would be hanging. Now he played rook to c8, and that's a passive move. That's not how you want to be using your rooks. Now I'm thinking about playing rook to c1, but then queen d6 is still a very strong move. All right, I'm still going to do it. I have an idea. So rook to c1 hits the queen, right? And we're basically ganging up on his c7 pawn. I have 3 attackers on the c7 pawn. He only has 2 defenders. I'm basically forcing him to find queen d6, because if he puts the queen somewhere else, I should be able to take or maybe jump the knight in, I have a lot of attack on his king. Now, if he plays queen d6, I'm thinking about playing queen to e5 check. Like not taking the queen. Well, queen to b6 was played. So I have 3 attackers. He has 2 defenders. He's counter-attacking my b pawn though, but his king has to be weak. His king has to be too weak. Like, okay, I could check he blocks with the queen. There's knight e5. Knight e5 comes with some ideas of taking on g6, and then the f pawn is pinned, and if the king takes, he could be getting checkmated. So let's go with knight e5. This is the more aggressive move. Okay, we'll just need to be aware of the fact that the rook is unprotected. Queen to d6, like just putting the queen back on d6. Shouldn't work though, because there's rook d7, which hits the queen. So all my pieces are just playing attacking role. Look on this. This is how you evaluate position. Again, king safety, whose king is safer. And then you're thinking about piece. Well, you also think about material. Who has more material? I'm ahead by a pawn. But you also need to think about piece activity. Like my rook is playing attacking role. His rook is defending. My rook is on the 7th attacking. His rook is defending. My knight is in the center of the board. His bishop is defending. Okay, comparing the queens, I think my queen is also better than his. I'm just saying that's how you should evaluate the position. Okay, he puts the queen back on d6. And this was where I was like, okay, let's just play rook to d7. I could still take on g6, but then he has queen takes g6. So let's play the move. Let's play the move rook to d7 first. And then if queen f6, I should be able to just take the queen, and then his pawn on c7 should be hanging. Or I could play rook to c6 check first. Okay, queen f6. We take on f6 with check, and then once the king takes, okay, if I check, the king is just going to go back. So let's just take on c7. We're now ahead by 2 pawns in an endgame. This is now just winning for white. Rook takes, I takes. Now, not only am I attacking this pawn, I was also threatening a fork. But rook to d8 is interesting, because if I take this pawn, he takes on d4. And by now, we should know that in the endgame, we don't really want to trade pawns. It's best to win those pawns. So let's go knight f3. Let's go knight f3 and guard the pawn. And then he's playing pretty active. Rook to b6, counter-attacking my pawn. Let's play b3. We're not trying to trade the pawns. Then he plays a5. Now, I'm going to check the king. Usually, you don't want to check the king in the endgame, but this is just to push him back. Because if he moves the king forward, I win the pawn with check. Now I attack the pawn. Maybe he's able to push, but that's what we want in the endgame. We want to put their pieces on passive squares. Now his rook is just very passive. And now that we're in the endgame, I'm just going to activate my king. Bishop to b1 attacks my pawn. Now I'm going to play pawn to a4, just moving the pawn. Slightly risky fixing my pawns on light squares though. But yeah, I was expecting rook to b1. Still don't want to be trading the pawn. So let's play knight d2, guard the pawn, attack the bishop. Now that he pulls the bishop back, that's when we take the pawn. Remember, when you're on the winning side in the endgame, it's best to not trade the pawns and just win them instead. So rook to b4 hits the pawn. Let's just roll the pass pawn. Bishop c2. Okay, now he has 2 pieces attacking my pawn. I only have 1, but rook to b5 is just a very good defensive move. Because now if I trade the rooks off the board, I'm winning. Rook to d4 counterattacks my knight, but knight f3 counterattacks the rook. And then I'm just going to continue to roll the pawn. But then rook to d3 hits the pawn. Now, what if I play knight e1? If knight e1, that's a fork. Rook takes, I take the free bishop. So knight e1, oh, it's pinned. Whoa. Okay, no, that was bad. Rolling the pawn was bad. There's bishop takes a4. Ouch. Okay, the time is now running. Let's just play rook to c5 and then just roll the pawn this way. I think I completely messed this up. All right, let's continue to roll the pawn. Bishop moves. Let's hit the bishop. The goal is to roll the pawn. Bishop moves again. Let's hit the bishop again. If he takes, I take. And then the pass pawn is just very fast. He moves the bishop. Now we pin the bishop to the rook. That's very hard for him. He blunders the rook in time pressure. Okay, now this is just completely winning. Okay, let's now hit the bishop, push the pawn. And if he takes the rook, we queen. Nice. Okay, but he also has 3 seconds on the clock. I mean, I have 9 seconds on the clock, but he lost first. More Italian game against 1,500 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,500. Let's play some more aggressive Italian game. So we hit the pawn. They guard it. We play the Italian game. And after they play knight f6, we hit them with the move pawn to d4. Very, very aggressive. Once they take on d4, we simply get the king out the center of the board, welcoming them to take a second pawn, which my guy did. And then once we play the move knight e3, this is called the Nack-Manson gambit, where, okay, everybody's playing the move knight takes c3. They're not playing pawn takes c3. So ensure that you're prepared for persons playing knight takes c3. Now, after knight takes c3, we just need to take the knight and then pawn d5. We play bishop b5. And that's the whole idea. Now, my plan from here is to, I'm creating a lot of threats. Like, what I want to do is apply pressure to the knight. Okay, bishop e7 was played. He's immediately trying to get his king out the center of the board. Okay, eventually we're going to just take back our pawn, but let's play the move knight e5. So that way, if he plays bishop to d7, we could take on d7. And then at least we could say we have the bishop here. And then the bishop here should give us a little advantage. So bishop to d7 was played. There's a lot of cases where you're able to take with the actual bishop because the knight on e5 is strong. But let's take on d7 so that way we have the bishop here. Then we take on d4. Now, in this position, black is able to castle safely. So this is actually someone who plays a very good defense against the Nack-Manson. But because we have the bishop here, I'm going to try to use that as my little thing to get some attack on his king. So I'm going to start by playing the move pawn c3, just maintaining this little pawn chain here. If he attacks the bishop, I'm going to pull the bishop back to d3 and then target his pawn on h7. Okay, he attacks the bishop. We're definitely not going to be giving up the bishop for the knight. This is the only little advantage that we have. And black also has an advantage because his king is castled and he's ahead by a pawn. So the only thing I could say that I have that he doesn't have is the bishop here. What could he say he has that I don't have? An entire pawn. So what I'm trying to do from here is to also get my pieces more active than his. If my pieces are more active than his and I have the bishop here, then I can start debating with him. But for now, there's no debate. I'm not saying I'm better. I'm not saying I'm worse. It's probably in the negative here. So, for example, a quick rook b1 won't hurt. A quick rook e1 won't hurt. Okay, bishop to d6 is interesting. That's very interesting though, because the pawn is unprotected. I want to play queen h5 and threaten the mate, and then once he stopped the mate, I take on d5. But there's bishop takes h2 and he's winning. So after queen h5, pawn g6, I'm thinking about queen h6. But if queen h6, there's rook e8, bishop f8. Okay, rook to b1 won't hurt. Let's get the rook in the game first. Let's get as many pieces as possible in the game. There's an idea of queen to h5. The pawn on d5 is unprotected, but it's poisoned. Because even if we take, there's bishop takes h2. I don't want to play pawn to g3 because, it's obvious that I'm just trying to play queen h5 there. Maybe I could try king to h1. King to h1 would make more sense. But, I'm not sure if I want my king on h1 because the plan is not necessarily to play f4, but I may actually play king to h1 and then f4. So rook to b8 guards the pawn. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. So maybe the plan is to play queen to h5, pawn g6, queen h6, and then eventually play f4, f5. Or maybe this is just me trying to talk myself into trying to trick him. But let's go with king to h1. Let's go with king to h1. All he needs to do now is maybe knight e7, pawn g6. It's very easy to not fall for this. He could play rook to e8, which actually falls for it. And rook to e8 is a very natural move to play because it gets the rook on the file, and all of a sudden, I'm threatening 2 pawns at the same time. But I'm going to just play for f4, f5, and I'm just not going to stop pushing the f pawn up the board. But one thing that I usually find uncomfortable is whenever I play f4 and then they play f5, it kind of keeps my bishop out the game sometimes. Well, he did play rook to e8, the most natural move, which means now once I play queen to h5, you know what the funny thing is? I think rook to e8 was the only move that allows me to take on d5, because even if the rook was still on f8 and let's say he plays a5, queen h5 could also be met with pawn to f5. Now if he plays f5, there's bishop takes f5. So now he kind of has to play something like g6 and I'm going to take on d5. Now, let's talk about the evaluation of the position. Now, in terms of piece activity, the queens are decent, the bishop is decent. I mean, I have the bishop here. My rook on f1 is not really doing anything, but if I'm able to play f4, f5, then all my pieces are going to be doing something. All his pieces are also going to be doing something, you know, so it's weird. But I have the bishop here. I'm just happy that I'm the one with the bishop here. So, okay, bishop c4 doesn't really do much just yet. But white has to be the one who is better now. Now it's just no debate. It's no debate here because I got the pawn and I still maintain everything I had. And the good thing is my king is not on g1. So if he plays bishop takes h2, I'm just going to take. All right. That was weird. Queen to e6 was a weird move because I'm able to take on e6. I mean, rook e6, there's pawn d5. So he has to take with the pawn. And then I have the bishop here in the endgame. I'm trying to see if there's anything better, like moving the queen, but I'm not seeing anything better. So let's just take the queen. He has to take the pawn with the pawn. So all of a sudden, we're now in an endgame, which is equal from a material standpoint. But if you evaluate the position, he has a weak pawn and I have the bishop here. Now, whenever the opponent has a weak pawn, it's very important that you fix the weakness. Fixing the weakness basically means you prevent it from moving. So let's play the move pawn to f4, preventing the pawn from going to e5. And then eventually I'm going to start attacking the e6 pawn with all my pieces. Okay, knight back to e7 was played. He's trying to put his knight in the center of the board, which is interesting because usually if you have a knight and the opponent has a bishop, a good plan is to centralize the knight. So what he's doing here is not bad. Now, because I know he wants to play knight d5, let's just play bishop to d2, developing the bishop. And then if he plays knight d5, it could be a blunder due to c4 followed by c5, trapping the bishop. And then all my pawns are guarded. Maybe he wants to play pawn to c5 instead, which makes a lot of sense. But because I have the bishop here, I don't mind if he opens the position. Okay, he did play knight to d5, and I think that's a blunder because, for one, once I play pawn to c4, there's no forward move for his knight. And a good way to know that you're dominating a knight is if you have a bishop and then there's two squares between the knight, and then there's the knight. So, for example, no, okay, what am I saying? What did I just say? I thought it would have trapped his bishop, but he's actually able to just put the knight on f6. Okay, that didn't make any sense. What I said just now didn't make any sense. But c4 was a good move, but his knight was not getting trapped. Now, pawn to c5 is still decent, but then his knight will eventually get access to the d5 square. I don't want his knight in the center of the board. Okay, now let's play rook to e1. Let's just get the rook on the file. Now, both of the rooks are active. Pawn g3, king f3 is also an idea, you know, just to improve the activity of the king. King to f7, okay. King f7. Okay, pawn c5 I'm always thinking of, but it just won't work. Pawn c5, bishop move, pawn c6, he takes. Let's just be patient. Let's play pawn g3 and then king g2. We're slowly improving the activity of our pieces. There's also bishop c3, pawn c5. Very good move. That's a very good move, pawn c5. Because I'm not able to play pawn d5, maybe I could try pawn f5, but then he just takes a free pawn. Wait, it's tricky. Pawn f5, if he takes that, nah, I mean, what I'm saying just shouldn't be good. Okay, let's just go bishop to c3 here. Let's go bishop c3. If he takes, we takes. Both of my rooks are going to be unprotected. As soon as I said it, I saw the tactic. After takes, he has bishop f4, pawn f4, rook d8. Oh no, it doesn't work because my bishop attacks the knight. So luckily it doesn't work. But I need to coordinate my bishops or just ensure that they're guarded. When you have more than one unprotected... Actually, okay, knight d7 was played. Maybe he wants to play knight c5. Let's play bishop to e4 here. applying some pressure to his pawn on b7. So that way, if he plays knight c5, I should be able to take the bishop and then take on b7, and then I'm going to be ahead by a pawn in the endgame. So he has to see that little idea. So he plays pawn b5. Okay, pawn b5 should be a mistake because I'm attacking the pawn twice. He's guarding it twice. But what if I play bishop to c6, pin the knight, hit the unprotected knight, and then once he guards the knight, then I take the free pawn. So he just blundered a pawn with bishop to c6. That was nice. Because now he just has to guard the knight. If he moves the knight, he loses the rook. So he has to play rook d8, then we take the pawn. I tell you about the bishop here. The bishop here is like an asset. The longer you hold on to it, the stronger they become. Okay, he plays king to e7, which is kind of suspicious because why is he putting his king on the same line as my rook? Now I'm thinking about other stuff. Like, that's a free pawn, but let's say pawn f5, hit this pawn. Yeah, pawn f5. Pawn f5 is just strong. The threat is better than the execution. Pawn e5, I was expecting pawn e5, but the knight is still pinned, right? And the pawn is still pinned. So I should be able to take, check. No, that doesn't make any sense though, because takes, check, the knight is gonna take. So let's just take on b5. The pawn on e5 is pinned. The good thing is, now the pawn on e5 remains at target. Okay, now let's take on b5 with the bishop. The knight is still pinned. I want to play pawn a4, so that way I can freely move my rook. I'm also trying to just take this knight. Okay, if I take the knight, he takes, I takes, and then he takes. Okay, let's play a4 then. Let's just play a4, so the bishop is guarded. If he moves the knight, he's still going to be losing this pawn. The issue is, if I take the knight now, he takes the rook first. So he moves the rook out the way, and I'm actually going to play the move bishop to a7 to attack his rook. Just forcing him to move the rook first, and then I find somewhere for my bishop. Let's just pull it back to f2. Okay, knight f6. Now I'm going to play rook d1. I'm threatening to sacrifice my rook. If he allows the rook sack and bishop c5, should be winning. So he moves the bishop out the way. Okay, because I have the pass pawn on a4, sacrificing should be good for me. But no, not sacrificing, trading. But let's just get the king in the game. Knight e4 makes sense. He's trying to fork here as well. So let's pull the bishop back to d1. Again, dominating the knight. The two squares in front of the knight. Remember we spoke about this? Bishop f6. Okay. Now we play bishop to b4, check the king. Just forcing his king over. Because if you think about it, king activity is very important in the endgame. So if I'm able to force this king away, then that's good for me. Bishop to c6 here looks like it wins material. Maybe I could have played bishop c6 from before. I don't know. But bishop c6 hits the rook and the knight. Let's try that. That's a fork. If he takes, I just take. So he moves the rook. Oh, but then there's rook c4. Okay, let's check the king first. Because if I take the knight, there's rook c4 and that's a fork. If bishop a4, he trades first. That's very strong. So I'm gonna play bishop a5 first to hit the rook before I take the knight. And then once he moved the rook, that's when I take the knight and we're winning. But he also has no time on the clock. With that being said, more Italian game against 1600 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1600. Let's continue to play some more aggressive Italian game. Bishop goes to c4, hit them with pawn to d4. This is the main move. And then once they take, we castle the king. And this is where everything starts. Now, immediate pawn to d6 that's interesting. I mean, the guy's not trying to allow me to play e5. He hasn't castled his king as yet, though. Knight g5 won't work due to knight e5. So let's just take the pawn back on d4 and then just play a good game because he hasn't developed his bishop on e7. So I don't think I'm going to be able to prevent him from castling, but I'm just going to have more space to play with. Okay, bishop e6 I really wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting bishop e6. I thought he would have just castled his king. Let's say we take on e6 and then play e5. If he takes, we play queen takes. All of a sudden, he has a weakness that I'm able to target. I mean, I can also just develop my knight, but then he's just going to castle like nothing is happening. So let's create a weakness in his position first. Let's take on e6. Once the pawn takes, we play pawn to e5. That's already a slight weakness that I'm not able to penetrate. But once he takes and I take, his e6 pawn becomes a weakness. And after that, I'm going to be developing my pieces, swinging the rook on the D and the E file, and start attacking him along this file. Okay, so he took. Let's just take back, hit the pawn. Queen to D6, I think, is the most testing move because it gains a tempo on my queen. And I don't want to trade the queens there because then he take with the pawn and his pawn on E6 is no longer weak. Usually, the definition of a weak pawn is a pawn that can't be guarded by a pawn. So he did find Queen D6. And now I just need to... Now I'm just going to move the queen. Okay, the question is, where does the queen belong? Because I think he may also want to castle on the queen side. Oh, wait, what am I saying? His b7 pawn is unprotected. Oh, but then if I check, he blocks with the queen. But then that's two weaknesses. Okay, let's play queen e2. I think queen b5 check was a nice way to get a slightly better endgame, by the way. But let's play queen e2, focus on the development of our pieces, and just see what happens. Let's just see... Okay, he castled on the queen side. I was expecting that, which is why I was thinking about putting the queen on e3, but I didn't really want to block my bishop. So the king is castled. Let's just use the time to develop here. His e3 pawn will be a weakness the entire game, so we're not necessarily trying to target it right now. You don't push pawns on the side that your king is on, bro. I think he's trying to prevent knight b5, but you don't push pawns on the side that your king is on. My plan from here is to start a pawn storm on his king. I need to get a good score for my bishop though. Bishop g5. Let's go bishop to g5 here. I'm also allowing him to play h6 g5, which is kind of weird because it's opposite side castle. So he needs to also start a pawn storm on my king side. But you know, it would just put my bishop on a good square. And his queen is the only defender of the pawn on e6. So my evaluation of this position is based on piece activity. It's so-so. I think my pieces are more active than him because his bishop on f8 is not yet developed. And if he plays bishop e7 here, it is developed, but my pieces are going to be able to join the game quicker than his. The next thing is pawn structure. I think my pawn structure is just way better than him. And in terms of king safety, because he plays pawn to a6 and push a pawn on the side that his king is on, I think my king is slightly safer than his as well. So the plan is never to take the knight. The plan was to get the bishop on this diagonal. And the plan was also just move the bishop out the way. So that way I'm able to swing my rook in the game. And now that I'm thinking about it, when he played pawn to h6, instead of moving the bishop, I could have actually just played rook to d1. So for example, here, even though he's attacking my bishop, I don't necessarily need to play bishop d3 to attack the queen. It's best if I play rook to d1 to attack the queen. Because now once the queen move, I'm going to take on d8. And then all of a sudden, the king that was already castled is back in the center of the board. So that's another thing that we can add on our evaluation as well. And that's how I want you guys to think about chess. And if you think about chess like that, you're also going to be a bit more patient when you're playing. Because if you're just playing the whole game, knowing that the guy's pawn structure is weak, knowing that his king is not safe, you're not going to try to really rush anything. Like, again, my bishop is under attack. We still don't even need to move the bishop. Like, I'm thinking of queen e5 or rook d1. Probably going to play rook d1. But can I make queen d5 work? Like, is there a difference between my queen being on e2 and d5? Because I think if I play queen e... I mean, why help the guy to develop his bishop? Let's just play rook to d1 and check the king. If he plays bishop to d6... Okay, bishop d6 allows queen takes e6. Maybe somebody's in the comments is going to be like, but why are you sending his king back to safety? I'm trying to get my rook on the file, bro. Like, I think all my pieces are kind of chilling here. I mean, I have to be careful. Like, the queen is targeting b2. But I'm not scared of that queen because his queen needs to stay guarding his e-pawn. I'm also thinking of playing knight a4, hit the queen, but then there's queen c6. So that doesn't really do much. There's queen e5, but then there is bishop g7 or bishop e7. So with that being said, it is time to get the bishop back to g3. I want you guys to notice how I haven't moved my bishop for about 3 to 4 moves because the moves that I was making is just more aggressive. That's like the definition of in-between moves. Okay, bishop to b4 is kind of off. That's not how piece coordination works, bro. Your bishop and your rook is unprotected. It's on dark squares. Immediately, I'm thinking about bishop to e5. I mean, there is rook to f8, though. I'm also thinking of playing queen to e5. There's still a rook to f8. But let's go with bishop to e5. It's the most forcing move. Rook to f8 is actually very strong because my f2 pawn is a target in my position. I mean, I should be able to get away with playing bishop to d4, hitting the queen. I have a little plan of putting my queen on the d file and then taking the knight followed by queen takes d8 mate, but that's like the easiest thing to detect. Okay, bishop takes e3. It's weird. Guy's giving up his bishop for a knight. Let's just take with the bishop. Keep my pawn structure slightly better than his at all times. Okay. Oh, okay. He wants to play knight d5. I think he wants to play knight d5. I think he wants to play. So if I put the queen on, let's say d2, he plays knight d5 and f2 is hanging. If I take, rook takes, queen d2, that's very interesting. Because I'm threatening queen d7 and queen d8. There's also queen e5. I don't want to allow queen e5. I don't want to allow knight d5. There's bishop to d4. But bishop d4, he's just going to move the queen. So let's go with this plan. Take the knight, so that way the rook no longer guards the back rank. And then I'm going to be able to play queen to d2. It's very important that I keep my f-pawn guarded. And because his rook is unprotected, he just has to be careful here. I'm threatening both queen d7 and queen d8. I think he needs to just play pawn e5, to be honest. Okay, he pulls the queen all the way back to f8. That's also just a very easy way to defend. And now I'm going to play pawn b3, guarding my pawn. So the only thing that I have that he doesn't have is just a better pawn structure. But, I mean, his king is slightly unsafe, but he just needs to walk his king over. That's what he needs to do. This check didn't really give me anything. Now my plan from here is to target his weak pawn on e6. And this is an isolated pawn, by the way, guys. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you guys, but whenever you're attacking an isolated pawn, this is the perfect endgame that you want. You want an endgame where you have a queen and a rook versus a queen and a rook, because it's harder for them to create counterplay when we play with this. Okay, pawn e5. The check still doesn't do anything. Let's play rook to, well, rook e1. There's rook d8, but let's go for that. Let's play rook e1 and just start our attack. It's going to be a case where I have two pieces attacking his pawn on e5 and he has two pieces protecting the pawn on e5. My pieces are going to be doing attacking role. His pieces are going to be doing defensive role. And if you find yourself on the defensive side of things, you should try to make it a situation where you sacrifice the pawn, but you get some attack for it. So queen d4 is fine. Okay, I think he just wants to play an endgame, but I don't think this is the best endgame for him to play. Like, it's good that he's centralizing his queen. If queen e2, he easily protects the pawn. But I think this is a good endgame for me because my rook is on the file. And remember, we talk about what we want to be doing in the endgame. In the endgame, we want to be attacking pawns. So immediately, I'm going to play something like rook to e6. And my next plan is to get my king in the game. So strong players are strong because they're able to find very, very slight advantage and use it. So now he plays pawn h5. Now I'm going to play rook to e5. Again, I'm just targeting the weak pawns. And what I want to happen is I want it to be a case where his rook is passively placed on g8. And again, what do we do in the endgame? We attack pawns. Rook to d5, attacking the weak pawn. If he plays pawn c5, I take. If he plays rook d8, I take. Now, he could try to play rook to e8, threatening a checkmate and threatening my second rank. But luckily, I have the move king to f1, and then his pawns are still going to be hanging. So this is a very important rook endgame for you guys to learn. Like, very important, because most games usually go into rook ending, but you don't want to just go in any rook ending. So I was able to evaluate that this is a good rook ending for me because my rook was just more active than him. And I knew that in the endgame, the goal is to attack the pawns. Okay, he plays pawn to c6. Let's just take the free pawn. Now we're ahead by a pawn, which means my plan from here is to create a pass pawn. He's also not doing the right thing, just pushing up the pawns like that. Like, he needs to focus on improving the activity of his king. Immediately, I'm thinking of rook d6 to hit the pawn. Rook h6, he has h5. Another thing I want you guys to notice, which is important because I may use this idea to win this game. I have what is called a pawn majority, which is 3 pawns versus 2 pawns, which means my winning plan is just to advance the 3 pawns up the board until 3 cancel 2 equal 1, and I'm just going to have a passed pawn. And whenever you want to think about which one of these pawns you want to push first, you usually want to push the pawn without the counterpart. So let's play the move pawn to f3, pushing the pawn that doesn't have any pawn in front of it, which means I should be able to play g3, f4, and rook to d8 is just completely immediately like whenever I see people play moves like this, it's literally the only move that ends the game. Guys, whenever you hear a person say, do not trade if you're down in material, it's because of this reason right here. So even when you're in the opening stage of the game and people are saying, do not trade when you're down in material, it's because if you go into a mathematically losing king and pawn endgame, it will be lost and it's very easy to win. It's a very easy position to convert. Now, when I say mathematically, it means I have 6 pawns, he has 5 pawns. There will be cases where 5 pawns draw 6 or even win, rare cases. But just take the rook and let me see if you watch my videos. Do you watch my videos? If you watch my videos, before I mention it, which technique am I going to use in order to win this game? How am I going to win this game? Think about that. And then if you're able to say exactly what I'm about to say, then your endgame skills is good. Now let's jump into it. The first step is to centralize the king. And the technique that we're going to be using is called the fox in the chicken coop technique, where after we centralize the king, we're going to be creating the passed pawn to distract the opponent's king. Then we're going to be running to the other side of the board. So let's just first centralize the king, and we don't rush the fox in the chicken coop technique. By the way, he's centralizing his king. Let's continue to centralize the king. Now that we have centralized the king, step 2 is to fix the pawns. So now we want to get him into a little zugzwang type of scenario. Now, not gonna lie, if he had played pawn to b4, that wouldn't be such a bad move. But he played pawn c5, pawn c3. I'm trying to find a way to fix the pawns now. Pawn c4, there's pawn b4. So I'm going to play pawn to a3. No, pawn c3, pawn a5, pawn a4. No, there's pawn c4 and that complicates it. Let's just play pawn c4 and fix the pawns like that. I just didn't want him to have an extra pawn move, but this should be fine. This should be good enough to win. Once I fix the pawns on that side, I don't have anything to worry about. Now I'm going to create my pass pawn on this side. His king is going to be forced to defend against my pass pawn until I abandon the pass pawn and then run to this side and then create a pass pawn on this side. Okay, he took the pawn. Let's just take, and you guys are saying, bro, you're always saying in the end game you don't trade pawns, you should win them. And that's still true, but I'm just winning. This plan is just winning. Let's just fix the opponent's pawns first, not rushing. He plays h5, now we play g3. You see how we're about to create the pass pawn now? g3 takes f4, creates the pass pawn. And if he push, we play f4. And once the pass pawn is created, it's over. Now we take 2 versus 1, pawn majority. f4 wins the game. I mean, if king to, this is also zugzwang. He's in zugzwang. So I'm basically winning this game without the help of the extra pawn. So for example, let's say my pawn was already on g4 and I didn't have this. The fact that he's forced to step away from the pawn allows me to play king to f5. And then now once I play king to f5, he's not able to make progress. So he still has to step his king away, and then I'm just going to take this pawn. So usually it's a matter of trades. Like notice how he wants to go here, and I'm going to play f4. It's all about entry. Entry is a very important technique in the endgame. You don't want to allow the opponent's king to enter into your position. And now we're just going to queen the pawn and win the game. Now we queen the pawn, and from here it's the opponent resigns. More Italian game against 1,700 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,700 and we're still playing some aggressive Italian game. So this is the Italian game, and after this move, knight to f6, we surprise them with pawn to d4. And usually they take. A lot of persons are going to take. Remember that knight takes e4 is just bad. That's a mistake. And then once they take, we just get our king out the center of the board. So he took, we just castle. Knight takes is me introducing. If they play knight takes, we go knight c3. And this is the Mark Hansen gambit, I think. Usually they quickly play bishop to e7 here. And after bishop to e7, I like to play e5. It's very aggressive. The solid move is usually knight takes d4, because bishop to e7 is actually, it's not as accurate. Like everybody plays bishop e7, but it's not accurate. Like knight takes d4 here is just fine for white, but I like to play e5 because e5 is just super aggressive. Now, knight e4, usually I go bishop d5, hit the knight. Okay, so knight e4, we go bishop to d5 and hit the knight. Like, this is usually how we want to play it, like right here, because usually pawn f5 is not good. So we're basically forcing them to be moving the same pieces over and over and over again. And then I like to play pawn to c3 and just sacrifice the pawn. Like, again, you know, if you're not afraid of just playing down a pawn, knowing that your position is just way better than them, and then they're just going to have a hard position to play, and then they're just going to blunder, then, you know, just take back the pawn and d4 and then just play like that. But if you want the position to be super aggressive, then you play like this. Okay, so this time around, he puts his knight on g5. How interesting is that? I think that's a blunder, no? That's a blunder, guys. Knight g5 is it's over after knight g5. Okay, here's what I'm seeing. Let's say we take on g5. The bishop has to take, and his f7 pawn is still weak. What if at that point I hit him with queen to h5, threatening a checkmate? But then I also have two pieces attacking his bishop. Is it possible for him to add additional defense to the bishop and protect the mate at the same time? That's my question. And I think the answer is no. So let's take on g5. Yup, this is what happens. Tactics flows from a superior position. If your pieces are on good scores, tactics is going to come. And remember, this is where tactics happens most of the time. That's why you should always be looking for your forcing moves, a capture which takes something, or a threat like queen to h5, threaten the bishop and the pawn on f7 at the same time. Now I think it's just GG's. Like 9 moves into the Italian game, it's over here. I mean, knight takes e5 guards the mate, but you know, his bishop is gone. Castle guards the mate, but his bishop is gone. Okay, so he decides to castle the king. The king is castled. We could always take with the queen and be like, okay, we're ahead by a piece. Let's trade the queens off the board. That's perfectly playable. In fact, queen takes g5 or bishop takes g5. They're probably, it's about the person who plays it. Personally, I'm going to play bishop takes g5 because my pieces are just way active than his. But queen takes g5 is like a guaranteed win. So here, I'm not saying that I'm not winning guaranteed, but I could still blunder my queen, you know? So if you're someone who blunders your queen a lot, just trade it off the board if you're winning. But this is just good for me. Like, there's no f6, by the way, because his f-pawn is pinned. So it's only knight to e7 or queen to e8. And I'm thinking about bishop to e4 to threaten some checkmate on h7, which should just be GG's. Because if f5, okay, there's no en passant if f5. Because I lose this. How unfortunate. Okay, so he did play queen to e8, and the move I wanted to play was bishop to e4 and threaten mate. And if g6, his dark scores are weak. But there's this annoying f5 move. And I can't even en passant because my queen is going to be under attack. Okay, that could work. I want to try rook to e1 first. Rook e1, maybe he plays h6. Let's go rook e1. Yeah, let's go rook e1. Wait, rook e1, there's knight takes. Let's go rook e1 still. Like, I think it would have been best to take the knight, then play rook e1, especially since I'm ahead by a piece. It's just that my knight is not in the game. I need to just quickly get this knight in the game. For example, if he takes, just knight d2 and just get the knight in the game. Because pawn to f4 trying to apply pressure to the pinned knight won't work due to knight f3. And because my rook is unprotected, once I take, queen e1 is mate, so it's still very tricky here. Okay, pawn to h6 was played. Pawn h6. Pawn h6. Pawn h6. Okay, I have a very nice idea that could lead to a mate. I think bishop to f6 could lead to checkmate. Sacrificing the bishop I also like. But I think bishop f6 could lead to a checkmate. Just exposing his king. Now, pawn g6 is immediate mate in 1, by the way. His f7 pawn is pinned. But if he takes on... Well, one thing I'm noticing is if he takes on f6, I'm never going to be able to take on f6 because I'm going to be mated. So if he takes on f6, I check king over. And then I play rook to e4 with some ideas of check, king over, mate. That's the plan. It's like, by the way, I want you guys to notice how I'm attacking without developing my knight. But if you look on the position just a bit deeper, it's like I still have more pieces doing stuff than him. So In those types of scenarios, you could still just grab an initiative without developing, So that's like one of the cases where you can break principles as well. Now, obviously, it would be way better if my knight was just on e4 here. Oh no, he plays king to h8, guys. Like, this would have been a very interesting game. Like, if he had played something like d6, I would have actually played queen g6, and that would have been mate due to the pin. But now that he played king to h8, he's basically putting his king on the same diagonal as my bishop, which means I'm able to just simply take on h6, check the king, and then once the king moves, queen takes g7 is just mate. So we take on h6 with check. Pin pieces don't protect, so the king now has to move. And 14 moves into the Italian game. That's just a checkmate. More Italian game against 1,800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,800. Let's play some aggressive Italian game with the idea of playing pawn to d4, inviting the Mack Hansen gambit. Now, after pawn takes d4, let's just castle the king, get the king out the center, and again, a lot of person are going to play moves like bishop to e7 because they want to quickly just get their king out the center of the board, but I like to just play pawn to e5 and start my attack. And then, okay, knight to e4, that's actually very interesting because there is knight to g5, so his knight is not necessarily getting trapped. Now, if I play rook e1, I'm assuming he's going to play pawn to d5, and if I takes, knight takes. So I'm still going to play bishop to d5 to hit the knight. Knight back to c5 was played. So his knight is just going around on a run. Okay, now we're going to play pawn c3, sacrificing this pawn. We're just trying to get some lead in development. If he takes, I take. Let's just take. Now I have 3 pieces developed, but his king is safe. That's the thing. His king is safe. Now, moves like pawn to d6, I'm expecting. I'm down by a pawn, so I still have to ensure that I play as active as I possibly can. So let me just use the time to play moves like bishop to c5, developing my bishop, applying some pressure to his knight. All my pieces are now developed, by the way. I'm down by a pawn, but all my pieces are developed. His bishop is not yet developed. Rook is not yet in the game. Queen is not yet doing anything. This is not yet doing anything. This has to count for some compensation. Okay, so he pulls the knight back to e6. This guy's playing very solid though, I'm not gonna lie. Even though he's moving the same pieces so many times in the opening stage of the game, it's a solid position. He hasn't created any real weaknesses as yet. Okay, now I'm thinking knight e4, so that way if he plays d6, I'm able to take the bishop here. But the bishop here isn't enough here. That's the thing. There's no weaknesses on his king side as yet, so I'm not necessarily thinking about attacking his king. We have to try to create some form of weaknesses first. With that being said, let's just get the least active pieces in the game. Like, whenever the game opens up, if all our pieces are so active, once the game opens up, then we should have some tactical blows. Rook to e8 was played. He's also getting his pieces in the game. Now, I'm noticing that f7 and h7 are slightly weak because remember what we spoke about when it comes to attacking the opponent's king, we want to be attacking pawns around the king. So I'm trying to think of a plan to target his h7 pawn. Now, let's not rush it though. I don't think I want to rush it because d6 is coming. I think d6 is coming. Let's play knight to e4 first. Knight to e4 I like because it makes d6 just a bit harder for him to consider. Now, if he plays d6, I have 2 pieces targeting his knight on c6. I'm not sure if I'm going to take it though. That's the thing, because I didn't really sacrifice a pawn just to try to win back the pawn. Like, that's not necessarily how you should be playing. You don't sack the pawn if that's going to be your whole game plan. I'm trying to get more than just a pawn. So from here, I'm trying to get more pieces in the game. He pulls the bishop back to f8. Like, knight to an eventual knight g5 should be interesting to just target his pawn on h7. I think he may want to play pawn g6, bishop to g7 eventually though. Pawn to d6 is what I'm kind of preparing myself for. And I would like to play something like queen c2 or queen d3, but knight b4 is just very annoying, I'm not gonna lie. But my rook on f1 is still not yet doing anything, so let's play rook to e1. All my pieces are doing something. I'm confident about that. That's the whole idea. If you could play openings where just focus on putting all your pieces on scores where they're doing something and then just chill. Like, what do I need to do now? The average person would try to be like, okay, I sacrificed my pawn. I'm down a pawn. How do I get back my pawn? I'm going to lose if I don't get back my pawn. But no, bro, like, look on the difference between my position and his position. Do you think that Look on black's position. Guy's ahead by a pawn. Do you think this is an easy position to play? I'm sure he feels claustrophobic. Well, he's harassing my bishop though. He's neutralizing my bishop. He's trying to chase my bishop out of his half of the board. Let's put that bishop back to b3. Eventually, the bishop should be going on c2 to target his h7 pawn. And then he plays knight g6. Okay, like he's moving his knights so many times over and over again. I'm not gonna lie, but he's really trying to defend certain squares like h7 because now it's gonna be harder for me to target h7. So we still have to try to do this slowly. We don't want to rush this too much. So let's just ensure that he's not able to play like very good forward moves. Once he's not able to play very good forward moves, we should be fine. Like, okay, now I'm gonna play. Okay, if queen to d3, there's knight f4. So let's play queen to d2 and connect the rooks. Okay, all the pieces are still active. We just need to not blunder here. Once we don't blunder, we're just going to keep on playing slightly, just slightly improve the position until there's some weaknesses that is created. Because I'm not going to lie, the guy doesn't really have any real weaknesses, but there's none of his pieces that are playing. So white is definitely better here. Pawn to a5. Okay, now that he's playing pawn to a5, it means he wants to play bishop to b4 because I just put my queen on the same diagonal as my rook. Didn't really notice all of that, but that's fine. Let's just play pawn to a3 to prevent it. Like if the bishop goes to b4, I would be able to play knight back to c3 anyways. Now he plays b6 because he wants to develop his bishop to either b7 or d7. And one good move I could play here is rook to d1. I like rook to d1. Well, rook to d1, there's bishop b7 still because my knight is unprotected. Okay, I have an idea though. Maybe I could try knight g5. There's bishop g7. What to do with this unprotected? Actually, let's play bishop to d5. I like bishop to d5 because bishop d5 prevents bishop to b7. And I kind of want him to play pawn to c6 because if he play pawn to c6, then he weakens b6 and d6. So what I'm trying to do here is provoking a weakness. And if he doesn't play pawn c6, my bishop is just going to be sitting on his half of the board. So you could say I just gained a tempo on his rook because I'm assuming he's going to play something like rook to b8. Yeah, he played rook to b8. He's trying to play very solid. Okay, now I'm going to play rook to d1. Now I'm going to play rook to d1. Because now if he plays bishop b7, he could be blundering his d7 pawn. So bishop b7 takes, and then I should be able to take on d7. But as I said, I don't necessarily only want back the pawn, but I'm also thinking about h4, h5 to attack this knight, but immediate h4 won't work due to knight takes h4. So it's still tricky. I just have to be patient here. So we did see the pawn c6 move. We did see pawn c6, so finally there's weaknesses in his position. d7 is weak. Oh, okay, bishop takes c6 is already a way to punish him for doing this. Nah, because the knight also guards the rook. So let's just pull the bishop back. Yeah, let's pull the bishop all the way back to a2. So that way, if I want to play bishop b1, putting it on this diagonal, I can. Maybe bishop back to c4 would have been fine, but I don't want him to attack my bishop again. Now, if he moves this bishop, he loses this pawn. But because the d6 square is weak, I'm also thinking about playing moves like just putting the knight on d6. So now I like my position a lot. Queen to c7 makes some sense. I mean, he's moving his queen, he's applying some pressure to this pawn, he's attacking the pawn twice, and I'm only guarding it once, so I need to do something about that. Knight d6 immediately I'm just thinking of though because it hits the rook and it also guards the pawn. I don't really have anything else to be honest, so let's hit him with knight to d6. If he moves the rook, I'm not going to take the bishop because my knight should be better than that bishop. Bishop takes, I'm going to play pawn takes though, and okay, now we play pawn takes, hit the queen, and the queen went back to d8. All right, sacrificing the rook followed by pawn d7 looks attractive, but it doesn't really do anything. But in that case, I could play knight d4 instead. Now I'm threatening to sacrifice the knight and then play pawn to d7. And if he takes the knight, I think taking with the bishop or the queen it should be fine. Even taking with the bishop, applying pressure here. I only have 2 minutes on the clock now though, so at this point, I have to be fast. Knight d4, queen d4, and then maybe try to pull my bishop to c3 to target f7 and g7 could be an idea. Okay, pawn h6, bro. You don't push pawns on the side that your king is on. That's one. It's like he's telling me to sacrifice my bishop. Okay, I'm not going to sack the bishop though because there should be queen g5 there. I'm thinking knight f5, but that was the initial plan. Just sacrifice the knight, fork him back, take everything on d7, and then c6 becomes weak. That's an idea. Can I just not do that though? Takes. Okay, I'm gonna do it because I don't have any time on the clock. But there should be something better than that, because this is gonna be trading a lot of pieces off the board. The good thing is the position is equal, so I'm not down in any material, and because my pieces are just way more active than his, I'm still better. Plus, I'm gonna have 2 bishops playing against 2 knights, and his pawn on c6 is eventually going to be a weakness. Okay, so he took with the queen. Let's grab the queen, and then grab the bishop. c6 is now weak. I have the bishop here. I'm expecting him to play pawn c5. And from here, my goal is to start. Okay, knight e5 also works. Okay, knight e5. Let's go here. Oh, he's actually ahead by a pawn. Oh, because when I pushed the pawn, he took the pawn. I didn't even think about that. That's crazy. All right, now I just have to be careful. Knight g4 is knight g4 leaves this unprotected. So pawn c5. Let's play pawn h3 now, though. Let's play pawn h3 to prevent this. Knight c3. There's rook d7. It's crazy. I only have 1 minute on the clock. Okay, knight d3 hits the rook. Let's play rook d1. If he takes the pawn, I play rook d7, and I'm gonna have 2 rooks on the 7th rank. I don't really care about losing that pawn right now. Okay, rook to d8. That's a nice move. That's a nice move. All right, let's play rook to d2. Let's go rook to d2 for now, guarding the pawn. Bishop to c4 could be a move next. I think he's just gonna pull his knight back and then hit my bishop. So I have to be careful. His knight on e6 is doing a good roll though, because I'm trying to target his f7 pawn. Maybe I need to play f4 and f5. That's definitely a plan. Pawn f4, and then even if he takes, I takes, and then f7 is going to be hanging. But pawn f4 leaves my bishop unprotected. That's the thing. Okay, he pulls the knight back. Let's just grab, and then f4. Hit the knight. And then once the knight move, I want to play f5. There's knight to c6 hits the rook though. But I'm going to play rook to b7, hit the pawn. I have 56 seconds on the clock. Knight c6, let's hit the pawn. Rook to b8 would be very strong here. Rook b8, I may play rook d7 though. Don't necessarily want to trade. Yeah, let's go rook d7. We don't want to trade because we're trying to play f5. Okay, I think he wants to draw though. He's ahead by a pawn and he's trying to draw. That's crazy. If he goes back, then I have to trade. Okay, let's just trade and then play bishop d5. I'm going to try to play for the win, being down by a pawn. Bishop d5 is to prevent the knight from coming in. Pawn f5 is still an idea. Maybe knight c7. I have the bishop here, so this has to count for something. I just need, okay, knight d4. Where's the knight heading? All right, let's play b4. No, let's get the king in the game. We have to get the king in the game. Okay, I think I need to take this knight and then, yeah, let's take the knight and then try to win it. Okay, let's pull the king back. So his knight has no forward move, and then king d3 should win this pawn. Not bad, not bad. Now we're going for this pawn. Yo, the guy's playing fast. Knight d7 I'm expecting. Okay, let's hit the pawn. Hit the knight. Let's go here. Oh, fuck! What the heck just happened? I just blundered the... What is this? Okay, that's 1 pawn. That's 2 pawn. Hit the knight. Push. Push. All right, this is not bad. This is not bad at all. Yo. Okay, hit the knight. Now we just have to roll the pawn. Okay, this is winning. Yo, that's crazy. How did I blunder that, man? Yo. All right, well, let's, okay, he has no time. Whoa. More Italian against 1900 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1900. Let's play some more Italian game. Knight c6, we go bishop c4. This is the Italian game. After knight f6, we hit them with the move pawn to d4. And again, knight takes is bad, pawn takes is the move. We get the king out the center of the board. Most people play bishop to e7 here, but knight takes e4 is actually the interesting line. And that's when we hit them with the Mack Hansen gambit. Or no, it's Nack Manson. Yeah, Nack Manson gambit. So usually they play knight takes c3. Knight takes c3 is actually a very interesting way to play. Pawn takes knight allows bishop f7, which is a line that black could play. So he decides to play knight takes. Let's take with the pawn. And after pawn to d5, what I like to do here is just to play bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the king. Because my whole idea is to check. I have someone, the 1300 guy played bishop to g4. The guy played pawn takes c3. That has to be a weird move. That's kind of weird, to be honest. He's ahead by 3 pawns, though, so it's still something. But, bro, develop your pieces. Let's play rook to e1 and check the king. Let's play rook to e1 and check the king. Let's see what's happening here. So he blocks with the bishop. Now we're trying to prevent his king from castling. So I want to go bishop a3. Bishop a3 allows him to castle, though. That's the thing. And if I take the knight, he takes my bishop. What if I play knight e5 here? If knight e5, there's bishop d7, and then after takes, bishop a3 wins. Knight e5, he castles. Let's play knight. Knight e5 is strong, actually. Knight e5 is very strong. Applying pressure to the piece. Because if he castles, I'm actually going to play bishop takes c6. And then if he takes back, I'm just going to take, and that's a fork. I mean, taking the third pawn, I wasn't expecting a 1900 to take like another pawn, you know? But I think bishop d7 looks like the most natural move. But fortunately for us, it's losing because after we takes, queen takes, bishop a3, pp on the pp. So he plays queen to d6. Now, the thing with queen to d6 is I'm not able to play bishop a3, but I should be able to play bishop f4. Or takes. Wait, what's this? What's happening here? Let's say we take on c3 and then play bishop a3. And then he takes the bishop and I take with check. He moves the king and I take the rook. He's ahead by 3 and I'm about to sack 3. So he's going to get 6. Out of that 6, me taking on c3, that's 9. He has 9. What do I get? I get 6 plus the 3 that I'm going to take here. So that's also 9. Does it work? Am I doing it the right way? Wait, bishop a3 first, maybe? Queen takes a3, then knight takes c6? No. Wait, do I have anything better than that? Let's say bishop f4 and he castles. Then I take on c6. And the queen is under attack, and if the queen takes my bishop, I take on e7. So bishop f4, I'm going to try bishop f4. But I think that would have worked. Please let me know in the comment. It's kind of tricky. I'm just not getting my math right. Because I sacrificed 3, he's already up 3. I think it would have equalized the position, but bishop f4 is nice. If he castles, then I think I'm winning an entire 3 points, and then the position is going to be equal, but I'm going to be ahead by a piece. It's weird. And then he decides to play queen to c5, which is also a very nice move because it keeps his bishop guarded, and he's taking his queen off the same diagonal as my bishop, and he's attacking my bishop. So he is playing some chess. The good thing is, what's the good thing? Okay, what if I play queen h5 here? Okay, he's just going to castle. We're not trying to allow castling. That's the thing. Knight takes, pawn takes. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try bishop takes c6. And then after he takes back, I play knight d3, hit the queen. And then I'm just going to try to keep his king in the center of the board for longer. So at least his queen is not able to go to d6, but his queen is able to go to a3. Like, I'm trying to deflect his queen away from guarding the bishop, but there's still queen to a3. So queen to a3, best I could do is try to hit him with bishop to g5. And then after pawn to f6, queen h5, and after pawn g6, queen h6. But at that point, I'm losing my bishop. Okay, let's say bishop g5, pawn f6. Wait, bishop f6, pawn f6, check. Bishop g5, pawn f6, queen h5, pawn g6. Queen h6, pawn g5, queen g7, rook f8. I need more pieces though. I need way more pieces. I cannot allow him to castle. Okay, I'm gonna repeat the position. Wait. Bishop f1, queen back to d6, bishop f4. Nah, that can't be good. If queen e2, there's bishop e6. So I'm actually going to go for this idea. Let's go bishop g5. There's something about this that is risky. That's too risky. Pawn f6. Okay. Instead of doing this now, I'm going to pull the bishop back to c1. So I do the same thing, but I get to keep his king in the center of the board. So, because now his queen has to move, and then once the queen moves, especially if it stays on a dark square, I can always go back to f4 with a tempo. So once the queen moves, I play queen h5, pawn g6, queen h6, and keep his king in the center. Like, once I get to keep his king in the center of the board, that's fine. Like that was the issue. And I was willing to sacrifice my bishop to keep the king in the center. So now pawn g6, well, if he moves the king, then that's fine. I think king to f8, maybe king to f8. If he moves the king, that should be fine because we achieved the goal. Then we put the bishop on f4 and then we just start playing regular chess. Maybe start attacking his pawns. But he plays pawn g6. Let's play queen h6. And queen to g7 is still a threat, by the way. Now that we... Wait. What if he castle on the queen side? Okay, it's going to take him a while. Because if... Wait, maybe bishop e6. If bishop e6, there's knight f4. I want to play queen to g7 very quickly, so that way if he castles on the queen side, he loses the bishop on e7. Now, once I get the chance to keep his king in the center, then I'll start taking the pawns back. King to f7 is actually the move because you can't allow queen g7. So what if, okay, bishop to e6 was played. If I play queen g7, he clearly gets the castle. So the move is either bishop a3 or knight f4. If bishop a3, he needs to keep this guarded, so he's going to play queen d7. And then I should be able to take on c7. I mean, it prevents him from castling, and if queen takes, I take on e6. At that point, he's able to castle though. But I think my position should be active enough. The other option is to play knight f4, and then force him to move the bishop somewhere. There's bishop f7 always. There's always bishop f7. At that point, there is queen g7, and he's not able to castle. But then there's rook f8. All right, we're actually going to be going with the bishop f4 line. I prefer the bishop f4 line because it allows him to castle on the queen side, but I get to attack him on the queen side still. So what I'm seeing is queen d7, bishop c7, keep his king in the center of the board for one more move. And then after queen d7, I take the bishop and then, okay, immediate bishop f8 I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting that move. First of all, what if I take the queen, he takes my queen and I take the rook? That's a fork. Nah, bro, that's not it, bro. Because now I'm able to play queen h3. Now I'm attacking your queen and I'm applying pressure to your pin bishop. You see, he's trying to flag me. Because my time was running out, he was trying to flag me. And then all of a sudden, he has a queen and a bishop hanging. And the queen is the only piece guarding the bishop, but the queen is hanging. And if he moves the queen, he loses the bishop. Oh my lord, there's king f7 though. Backside. Okay, there's no way I missed that. Takes. Okay, let's play queen f3. I have to play fast. So now his queen has to move still. I'm thinking about knight to e5. That's crazy. Okay, knight e5 once the queen moves. Pawn takes. Or maybe I should play bishop to g5 first. Yo, that was crazy though. Was that defense working? I'm down by 3 pawns, by the way, guys. So I need to get something out of this. That's a dead pawn. I think that's a dead pawn. I think if I'm trying to win back the pawns, I should be able to take them. For example, once he moves the queen, I'm probably going to play bishop e5, threaten f6, and c3. Or, look at this. Isn't that... Okay, no, never mind. I'm still going to do it. I don't have any time. Now I'm threatening his pawn twice. The idea is, if he uses his bishop to defend the pawn, knight e5 wins the queen. So he has to use his queen. And then once he used the queen is going to be pinned. And then I'm going to play knight f4 and apply pressure to the pinned bishop. That's crazy. So maybe he needs to play queen d8. If queen d8, do I sack, takes, check, king back? No, queen d8 is the move. He's not. Okay, queen e7, as we said, we play knight f4. PP on the PP. Good game. He's also not able to take my bishop because it's poisoned. Oh my lord, he's able to take the bishop. Because if I take on e6 check, he blocks with the queen. Which means if he takes the bishop, I have to play rook takes hit the queen. And then he just moves the queen. Yo, wait, let's think. If he takes the bishop, no. If he takes the bishop, there's knight takes d5. So he brings the rook in the game. And I'm assuming he's about to sacrifice. So let's play rook takes. I think he's going to sacrifice his queen here. Once he sacked the queen, we're winning. That's crazy. That is crazy. Okay, he sacked the queen. This is winning. The funny thing is, I'm only ahead by 1 point. How funny is that? Okay, let me just get this rook in the game. Let's get the rook in the game, trying to get the rook on the 7th rank. Okay, bishop d6, he's developing. I need to be careful about my back rank here. Let's take on c3 first, because he's not able to take due to this pin, and if bishop e5, there's queen f3. Now there is rook to e. Okay, bishop e5, let's just go back. He's still not able to take. And that's actually bad for him because he needed to move his bishop so that way he was threatening some back rank stuff. So that was actually wasting time. He moves his rook. Now I'm going to play pawn to g3 so that way any little back rank idea I'm able to run with the king. And to know which one of these pawns to push, just ensure that the opponent... Okay, let me just play. I need to trade because I'm winning. Just ensure that the opponent doesn't really have a piece that should be able to block you. Now it's just a matter of taking back the pawns. It's saying that I'm only ahead by 2 points, but this is clearly winning because now it's just a queen versus a rook. Like, will the rook be able to just guard all his pawns? I have 50 seconds on the clock, but this is way more than enough time. Because once I take this pawn, I'm just going to be rolling my pass pawn up the board. Okay, he moves the pawn. Let's continue to attack it. Remember that the goal is to attack the opponent's pawns in the endgame. Notice I'm not trying to go and checkmate his king because I know my queen by itself is not going to be able to checkmate him. So pawn a5, now we take the pawn, which means we have a pass pawn, and we're just going to be rolling it up the board. So let's go queen c5, attacking more pawns, just to force him to play a defensive move. But I was actually really trying to just start rolling my pawn, to be honest. Like, that's a dead pawn, but let's just roll the pawn up the board. Let's just roll the pawn. But he resigns. More Italian game against 2,000 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 2,000. Let's play some more aggressive Italian. We're going to be finishing off with a bang. Bishop goes to c4. And then after knight f6, we hit him with pawn to d4. Now, how I get to play these games, you guys leave your username in the comment and the ratings, and I'll send you a message. Now, after they take, let's just get the king out the center of the board, sacrificing the second pawn. I've seen bishop to c5 here, which is a mistake. Bishop to e7 I've seen a lot, but whenever I see bishop to e7, I just play pawn to e5 and attack the knight. Knight to g4, I have seen this while playing this opening, and usually what I'm going to see is they're applying pressure to e5. Bishop takes f7 followed by knight g5 does not work here, by the way, because if we sack the bishop and the king takes, and then we play knight g5, he's going to take. So we're basically losing too much material. So let's just play rook to e1. The plan is to play pawn to h3, chase the knight out of our half of the board, give up the bishop for a knight, and his king is going to be exposed, which is why he didn't castle. He played pawn to d5 instead, which is attacking our bishop. And now I'm thinking, do I take? If I do take, he's going to play queen takes. And then once I play h3, the knight go back to f6. That's not what I want. I don't want his knight going back to f6. I want to be able to play h3, and his knight has to go to the edge of the board so I can double up his pawns. The question is, though, where do I put my bishop? Because bishop b5 is usually the move. Bishop b5, a6. I'm gonna have to give up 2 bishops, though. Takes, knight d4 hits this. Oh, if bishop d7, there's a little trick though to win a piece. Let's go bishop b5. If a6, I give up this bishop, play knight takes d4, which means the queen attack the knight. And if he plays bishop d7 to guard the pawn, there's actually pawn e6, which hits the bishop and cut off the communication between his bishop and his knight. So that would actually be crazy. Okay, he decides to play pawn h5, and the whole thing that he's doing, he just doesn't want to get the double pawn. So if I play h3, he's either going to pull the knight back to h6 and said, okay, I put my knight on h6, but no, if you takes, there's rook takes. But what if I play knight takes d4 instead? Because if I play h3, I'm also assuming he's going to try some little fishing pole business. So let's take on d4 first. Taking on d4 is applying pressure to this pinned knight twice. He's only guarding it once, so I'm expecting bishop d7. Now do I play h3, and if knight back I take on h5? It's a little idea that I have. There's also ideas of pawn to e6 hit the bishop. Pawn e6 takes. Okay, this should be uncomfortable for white. I'm also knocked down by a pawn, by the way. So how do we do this? Usually once the bishop goes to d7, we don't want to take with the knight because pawn takes gives him a tempo. So we take with the bishop, and then after he plays pawn takes, we get the tempo. If I hit the knight, he may counterattack my knight. All right, let's get rid of the knight first because my pawn on e5 is under attack. Pawn takes, we play h3. If knight back to h6, we take on h5. I'm expecting pawn to c5 though. If pawn c5, I'm going to calculate pawn to e6. Okay, there shouldn't be any fishing pole if it's hard for the queen to get to h4. But let's say I take. How hard is it to put a bishop on c5 and then play queen g4? You know, it's tricky, but hey, whose king is safer here? That's the $1 million. Well, it's not $1 million question. I think my king is safer. I just need to think about how dangerous taking this knight is. And I was expecting him to find c5. Offense is the best defense. The guy's 2,000. But wait. Okay, I'm going to play e6. If he takes, I takes. That's not bad because his king is in the center. Wait, no. Come on, bro. Pawn to c5. This is now unprotected. This is simple. Just pull the knight back to f3. Okay, but the thing is, he's going to sack the knight. That's the thing. If he pulls the knight back to h6, we take the free pawn. If he sack the knight, I have to take the knight. That's going to be a problem. I'm going to do it. Maybe I'm not going to take the knight, though. Let's see. It depends. Okay, let me calculate. Let's say... Okay, he just moved the knight. He didn't even think about the fishing pole idea, which means the pawn on d5 is now just hanging. The guy's king is still in the center of the board, by the way. So just the whole idea of trying not to double up his pawns, all of that cost him a pawn. So let's just take on d5, and we are officially winning. I'm using the word winning, by the way, because what don't I have here? Maybe the bishop here. Bishop here doesn't matter right here. Like, guy's king is in the center. He has double pawns here. Okay, bishop e6. He's also trading the queens off the board. I mean, I should be a fan of trading, though. I should be, but can I get more from this position? Seeing his king is in the center? Because if I take, then I'm just helping his rook. So let me check him. I'm going to check him on c6, so that way he goes back with the bishop, and then I'm going to find a better score for my queen. Okay, he moves the king, which also makes sense. I mean, the king needs to be moved to safety. There's bishop d5, which is coming. So let's play knight c3. Let's develop the knight, control the center. I'm not going to take this knight because rook takes. I'm helping him to bring the rook in the game, which means he will be getting his knight off the edge of the board. And okay, am I able to play bishop to g5? It's very concrete. If takes, I play knight takes. Queen takes is not possible because it hangs the rook. And bishop to g5 threatens rook to d1. Bishop to g5. If knight d4, I take with check. And if queen takes, he loses the rook. If king takes, I take. And then after takes, I'm just not losing. And I can also swing the rook in the game and pin. So bishop to g5 is just a very nice move. It's intentionally putting my bishop on a square that I know he's guarded twice, but the queen is overworked, covering g5 and guarding the rook. So bishop takes g5. We play knight takes g5. Queen takes... What? Queen takes g5, bro? What did I miss? That's a rook with check. How is that 2,000... Am I getting mated here? Let's say I take the rook because my queen is going to be out the game. If I take the rook, there's knight h4, threatens mate. I go back to h8, stop the mate. Bishop takes h3, attack g2. Wow. Okay, there's knight d5 check. There's knight d5, check. Once the king moves, there's knight e3, and I have two pieces covering the pawn on g2. I have three. I have the king, the knight, and the queen, and he has the bishop, the knight, and the queen. There's no knight f3 check ideas because my queen is going to be on a8. There's no bishop going to d5 targeting g2, and g2 is my weakest pawn. So that's just... Thanks for the rooks, bro. That was definitely a miscalculation. Maybe he was expecting some pawn g3 or something, but I wouldn't want to have my queen out of the game anyway, so let's just play queen to a8. That's not mate. My queen is now doing such a good defensive role. And yes, I'm assuming he saw bishop takes h3, and he's going to be like, that's more attackers on the pawn. But the bishop no longer guards the d5 square, so now I'm able to check him. Now, temporarily, it's a check. So temporarily, my g2 pawn is just under attack. But once the king moves, and he also has to be careful where he moves the king, because if the king goes here, I could check here. If the king takes, maybe I check the king again, but the whole idea is to take on h3. So he decides to put the king here. Now, I do not have any more checks, so I have to play knight e3, but this was the whole idea. He does not have checkmate in one move, which means I'm going to be able to play moves like rook d1, queen d5, and his king is going to be getting checkmated. With that being said, if you want to be good at defending, you have to also be good at attacking, because I had to know at this point right here that, I mean, That I don't think it was a blunder. I think he just thought he had something. But at this point right here, I just had to know that the G2 pawn is the weakest pawn because it's the only, well, it's not the only pawn. There's also F3, but his pieces are not coordinated in a way where it attacks F2. So I know that if I'm able to protect my G2 pawn, he's losing. So I just grab the rooks and just tactics the guard G2. Now he plays pawn to C6. That's a good move because now he still has 3 and now I have 2, which means everything is under attack. But all I need to do is check him on b7. And then once the king moves, don't care where the king moves, I take on c6. Once g2 is guarded, I'm just going to be ahead by a rook and couple material. It's over now. The funny thing is, once he moves his king, I'm going to be able to take on c6 with a check, which is why he resigns. Subscribe.